Our story begins with a girl running desperately down a corridor. She enters a room and asks what's wrong. A man only calls for a healer, while his foot is transforming into something horrendous. In excruciating pain, he demands the immediate presence of a healer. The story then takes us back to a few hours earlier. The same man walks through the streets. However, he's injured in multiple parts of his body, but he feels relieved to have finally reached the village. His name is Ruth Jaker, an adventurer from the continent of Azef. He is furious for having been ambushed by a pack of black wolves. Ruth Jaker didn't face just one or two of them, but rather about 30. He had to kill them one by one, but fighting 30 wolves alone is a challenging task, even for him. And now, the first thing he must do is find someone to heal him. Jaker wonders if he should borrow money from the Adventurers Guild. He reaches the guild and receives payment for completing his last mission, but it's not enough. The receptionist quickly informs him that the borrowed money will be deducted from his next mission's earnings. She also mentions that his injuries look serious and advises him to seek treatment immediately. Feeling nauseous, Ruth leaves the guild. At this rate, he feels like he'll die before reaching the church. However, before he leaves, someone notices his wounds and asks Ruth Jaker if he needs a healer. If he does, he won't have to go far. Jaker wonders who this guy is. The man says he'll charge a small fee, and that Ruth Jaker can pay after the healing service is completed. Jaker grows suspicious and asks the man to show his healer's credentials. He knows that fake healers are quite common, as they tried to earn as much as the real ones, but only true healers have credentials, which are issued to them by the Adventurers Guild. Fake healers don't show their credentials because most don't even know they exist. Due to the mysterious man's hesitation, Jaker becomes even more skeptical. The mysterious man says the guild refused to issue him a credential after claiming he couldn't demonstrate his powers. Therefore, he has none to show. Without hesitation, Ruth Jaker leaves, not believing that a healer without powers could help anyone, nor does he trust the mysterious man. However, the supposed healer knows Jaker was attacked by sharp claws, and says the stray must have been quite strong, as Ruth Jaker's appearance is not pleasant at all. He also observes that the wounds are fresh, and Jaker must have been injured nearby. And if he's correct, Jaker was likely attacked by a black wolf, also being hit by such a strike due to his injured ankle. Ruth Jaker asks how he knows all this just by looking at his wounds. The man replies that, although it doesn't seem so, he works on fixing people. He also mentions that if Ruth Jaker goes to a priestess, it will cost around 600,000 in gold, and a guild healer would charge half of that. With that, he concludes that 150,000 is a very low price compared to others, which makes Jaker certain he's a fraud. He leaves, telling the stranger not to hover around injured people. The man tells him not to go, as his wounds won't heal on their own. Finally, the supposed healer remarks that Ruth Jaker is seriously injured, and if he starts writhing in pain while sleeping, he can come find him, as he'll be right there, waiting. Ruth Jaker thinks the man is truly persistent. After that, he heads to the church, and begins receiving some treatment. The priest says he was healed by the powers of Ivert, and the total service costs 620 gold coins. He concludes by saying, "May Ivert bless your next adventure, Jaker." Upon leaving, Jaker thanks him and laments the high costs but considers it a worthwhile investment, as the church provides the best healing money can buy. He still feels some pain but assumes it will soon pass. However, late at night, in his bed, his foot starts hurting and transforming into something strange. Ruth Jaker is utterly desperate because of it, and he begins to scream, calling for a healer. He knows he paid a priest to heal him, so he wonders why he is still in pain. But he quickly remembers what the mysterious man said earlier, that he would feel severe pain and should seek him out. However, he refuses, saying that anyone could make such a claim, and he can't trust a healer who doesn't even have powers. Moreover, the man didn't even mention his name, but surprisingly, the mysterious man appears there, saying he warned this would happen, introducing himself as the healer who doesn't use healing powers. He enters and says they meet again. Upon entering, he asks Julia, the girl who works there, to let him take over from that point on. Sarcastically, he asks Ruth Jaker if he feels good after paying for such an expensive treatment, to which Jaker responds that, as he can see, he is not well at all. He feels like he's going to die, and urgently needs something for his leg. The healer says he wants a payment of 300,000 gold to perform the service. Jaker is shocked at the price, but the healer says that if he doesn't want to be healed, he just needs to say no. However, Ruth Jaker says that's not it, and asks what happened to the previous price. In response, the healer explains that his condition has worsened threefold, so the treatment will be more challenging, justifying the price increase. And if the cost is too high for him, Jaker can simply call another healer. However, he doesn't let the man leave and pleads for help, offering his sword as payment, saying it's the only valuable thing he has, and if sold, it could fetch around 200,000 gold. The healer evaluates the sword and says its value is below the cost of treatment, but he'll offer a first-time discount. Ruth Jaker watches his sword disappear in the healer's hand and asks what he is. The healer, however, wants to get straight to treating his leg, and Jaker asks if this is some kind of terminal illness or something similar. Answering the question, the healer says that Jaker's leg is in terrible condition, and if they hadn't met, it would likely have to be amputated. He adds that there are 3 things that cannot be cured with healing abilities. One of them is poison-related injuries. However, the healer offers something to Jaker, and he asks what it is. The healer reveals it's a tangerine seed, which carries poison in its roots and paralyzes a person if ingested. And the natural venom of these trees is one reason why wolves reside near them. They come into contact with the trees and transfer the poison to their prey, infecting Ruth Jaker's leg after it was bitten. Jaker is devastated, thinking he'll never walk again, and pleads for help. But the healer presents a solution, showing a type of potion that will cure him. Ruth Jaker is fearful, and asks what the healer plans to do next. He responds that the antidote must be poured directly onto the wound. He also states that, personally, he wouldn't want to touch anything to heal him, but to do a proper job and avoid any lasting effects, he'll need to cut open Jaker's leg and apply the antidote directly at the source of the problem. As he mentioned earlier, he doesn't have healing powers, not by choice. He simply cannot use them. Additionally, he doesn't have anesthesia, so Jaker will have to scream to cope with the pain. Ruth Jaker says he's not mentally prepared to continue. The healer simply warns him not to move, or things will get worse, and begins the procedure. He knows it's common sense for healers to use healing abilities. While applying the antidote, he reflects that there's no reason to follow common practices since he can't use powers. His name is Kang Sun-yoon, a healer from the continent of Azel, who operates in the shadows due to his unorthodox methods. 3 years ago, Kang Sun-yoon opened his eyes and found himself in an unfamiliar cave, but something that was familiar to him. The place was infested with monsters, and he only had a stake to defend himself, while watching other humans struggle against the creatures. A message appeared to him, stating he had been assigned the role of a healer. This was a different world, nothing like the Earth he once knew. For some time, he felt lost and wanted to know how to return home, and the only good thing was that he wasn't alone. Other people had also been dragged there and joined forces to find a way back home. From the start, Kang Sun-yoon realized this seemed like the setting of a fantasy story, mainly because of the system screen, which listed his role as a healer, but with a question mark beside it. One of the companions suggested that they focus on finding a way to survive first, and then seek answers. With so many monsters around, it would be difficult to work separately, so they would have to band together. She asks if everyone there has work-related skills. Kang checks the skill window and sees one skill described as incision, which allows him to cut things using sharp objects. Another skill is good communication, enabling him to interpret any language. There's also the observant eyes skill, which allows him to see everything attentively. But none of this aligned with his designated role, because he still hadn't officially been assigned as a healer. Back to the present moment, Kang Sun-yoon cleans his hands, declares the job done, and advises Jaker to wait 24 hours before walking again. Jaker, however, is simply happy to have survived, even if the process was painful. He thanks the healer, saying that thanks to him, he is still alive. Kang replies that he told him there was nothing to worry about. Meanwhile, Kang notices the patient is visibly healed and wonders if this is possible without using healing abilities. Ruth Jaker apologizes for previously calling him a fraud. Kang says it's okay, as he hears that all the time, precisely because it's common sense that healers use magical abilities. With those words, Jaker realizes that, on top of everything, Kang also has a kind heart. The healer says that hearing people beg to be saved is quite amusing and that he works hard because he genuinely enjoys it. Hearing this, Jaker retracts his observation about Kang having a kind heart. After that, Kang leaves Jaker's room at the Beast's Fall Inn. He sits down and asks Julia to prepare a good meal. She is a competent worker at the inn. While waiting, Kang writes in his diary. He notes that he developed a new skill after visiting a certain location, a place teeming with monsters, and filled with a highly toxic presence. Surviving there was an extraordinarily challenging experience. In his search for a way back to Earth, he records his discoveries in his diary. In the meantime, he hears Julia scream after injuring herself. Kang approaches and asks if she's okay. The girl is startled, but the healer insists on helping her, even as Julia repeatedly says she's fine. Incidents like this irritate him, so Kang decides to use his observant eyes skill. He examines the patient thoroughly and identifies a superficial knife wound. He informs Julia that she shouldn't continue cooking and offers once again to dress the wound. A bit shy, she apologizes for causing trouble. Afterward, Kang uses the hemostasis skill to stop the bleeding. When he finishes, Julia thanks him. His system alerts him that he has gained another point, bringing his total to 103. These points accumulate, allowing him to upgrade his skills whenever he wishes. With this, he spins the skill roulette 5 times in a row. Through the points, he earns several bonuses by spinning the roulette randomly. However, he becomes slightly frustrated for not receiving any gold among the other prizes. Nevertheless, one prize catches his attention. A new skill has been acquired. It's called Spray, which absorbs potion energy with a 30% boost. Kong is eager to test this new skill and creates a potion. Activating it, Kong breaks the vial and absorbs its properties. Afterward, the Spray skill is used, restoring physical abilities within its range. He is delighted by its efficiency, as it can be used on patients, and is more effective than a simple potion. While Kong is using the skill in the middle of the street, a passerby becomes startled by him. The man falls to the ground in fear. He angrily gets up, and Kong tries to apologize profusely. The man asks why Kong is attacking random people on the street. However, Kong replies that seeing these skills updated, he wants to stop now. Hearing this leaves the man utterly confused, but he soon notices an improvement in his stats. Grateful, he realizes Kong is a healer. The man adds that this is the first time he's seen something like this. Kong is happy to help and realizes the man is a dimensional traveler, as only such individuals would know about exclusive skills. The traveler then says this must be fate and invites Kong to join an adventuring team. He explains that he and his team were looking for a healer, and with Kong, they would have 4 members, the ideal number for a party. As for the conditions and commissions, he mentions that the team hunts rare monsters. The compensation is around 1.2 million gold. Kong thinks that's not a bad reward. The team is unlikely to have another healer, so he considers accepting the offer. At the same time, at the Adventurers Guild, a group is about to hire a healer, and asks to see his abilities first. He demonstrates, claiming he can handle the team's healing alone. In front of the Adventurers Guild headquarters, the rest of the group meets with Rick. Kong Sung-yoon recalls that he mentioned the group only had 3 members. The other guy notices the confusion. Both hired a healer at the same time. He asks if they both saw the poster for the mission worth 1.2 million gold and says the amount is high enough to split among everyone. If they agree, both healers agree. Kong notices that the other healer doesn't seem interested in backing out now, as he must also be after the reward. With everything settled, Piriol introduces himself, and the protagonist does the same. But something bothered the other healer. Regardless, everyone set off for the mission. Rick seems to be the most excited of all, together with one of his friends, who comments it's great to have 2 healers in the team. The other healer, however, is annoyed, thinking he won't forget the earlier awkward moment. He claims he can use advanced healing levels, blessings, light shields, anti-venom, recovery, resurrection, not to mention sacred abilities, leaving everyone else impressed. Kong demonstrates his abilities instead of listing them, impressing them even more. The envious healer fumes with anger, thinking Kong is showing off with likely useless and never-before-seen skills. But he is ignored, as Kong speaks with the leader, asking what kind of monsters they'll encounter ahead. Piriol replies they will probably face sewer rats, and didn't know they were considered rare monsters. He couldn't imagine such a high reward being offered for something so simple. Kong, however, asks why he thinks that, and he asks if they've hunted monsters before. Piriol replies no. The other healer also says he hasn't even been in this profession for a year. With that, Kong says that to fight rare monsters, they need a lot of potions and should return to the village to prepare properly. Piriol doesn't want to return after traveling a certain distance. Sarcastically, the other healer asks if Kong forgot to stock up and says he can run away if he's scared. He then declares he will proceed alone from here. The others are not too happy about this, except for the healer. Piriol asks Kong if he's serious, as he can't just come running back if he strays too far from them. The protagonist states that he is sure they'll mess up and promises to come to their aid later, but he demands 300,000 gold as payment. Thus, they part ways, blaming Rick for inviting Kong to the team. The other healer bids him a sarcastic farewell, wishing him a safe trip back, thinking Kong is fleeing out of fear of a mere rat. However, Kong is interested in getting his hands on the rare item he's heard about, which is why he agreed to this mission. Sometime later, the group members spot the rat and are waiting for the right moment to strike. The healer offers to boost the other's stamina. With that, they advance on the enemy. The rat notices their charge and becomes alert. Piriol attacks first, aiming to kill the enemy, but he hits the ground and loses sight of the rat. Next, the enemy reappears and catches a teammate off guard. Soon, it grows larger, and its mana increases, leaving everyone duly impressed. The leader instructs the healer to act quickly, and to provide the blessings the others need to fight. However, he is shocked by what he sees. Not just him, but the rest of the team as well, because the giant rat summons smaller ones. With this large group, the warrior on the front line was the first to be attacked, followed by the others. The healer panics, as he can't help everyone at once. Rick is the only one who hasn't been attacked yet, and tries to run. The healer quickly calls him a coward for fleeing but realizes he might need to do the same, as his mana is running low. Then he notices Rick heading toward a portal. As he runs, he laments for his companions, saying he will save them in their next life. But what he notices next is that, upon crossing, he comes face to face with the healer and doesn't understand why. Because he was sure he was running in the opposite direction. In a brief moment of distraction, he falls, and the healer becomes desperate for being alone. However, when he least expects it, a potion vial is thrown, and Kong appears, saying it happened exactly as he had predicted. The healer is surprised to see him. Meanwhile, Kong asks him to think about it. Who in their right mind would place such a high bounty on an ordinary rat? He also says he should have charged 500,000 gold for the rescue. Although he killed some of the rats, others are still alive. The healer is shocked by Kang's arrival. Kong, however, simply states that the rats will soon run in their direction. Then, he reminds the healer, Marbello, that he had claimed to be capable of using a light shield. But trembling with fear, Marbello says he doesn't have enough mana. So Kong hands him a vial to restore his mana. And slowly, Marbello begins to regain his energy. Marbello is impressed by the rapid mana recovery through a skill. He thought no skill could restore mana but recalls being taught otherwise by his mentor, who told him never to expect anything for free, because the person capable of achieving such a thing could only be a true deity. With this, Marbello asks who Kong really is. The protagonist asks what he thinks. Marbello lists several names and asks if Kong is the reincarnation of one of them. Immediately, he kneels before the protagonist, apologizing for previously disrespecting him, and swears by the name of Lord Ivert that he won't say anything about what he witnessed today. However, the protagonist imagines that revealing the truth about his past would be embarrassing. Regardless, the rats approach, and the team members are still unconscious. Marbello tries to ward off the advancing rats. He prays to the benevolent god Ivert, by the order of the Great Being, to grant him sacred strength, and with it, Marbello invokes the shield of God. The protagonist realizes the boy wasn't bluffing when he said he was skilled. Marbello is pleased that he succeeded, and the protagonist tells him to keep going without bothering him. Then, Kong throws more vials. He hurls them at the rats. He knows the reason for the mission's high reward. It's due to the enemy's trap. The larger rat has the ability to control the smaller ones at will. The adventurers were overwhelmed by the sheer number of monsters and fled, but unknowingly fell into a mini-dimensional dungeon. However, the protagonist had prepared in advance with a very specific pesticide, created from concentrated mint. With that, he charges toward the rats, because he knows this potion is effective even against intelligent animals. Kong is aware that he cannot drive away such a massive swarm of rats. Thus, his strategy is limited to targeting the larger rat, which controls the others. Using the spray skill, he attacks when the Rat King's guard is down. Kong grabs the monster's fur and makes an incision on it with his potion. As soon as it starts taking effect, like a bull, the rat tries to throw him off. The protagonist clings on as best as he can, but the rat aims to crush him against a tree. This leaves Kong somewhat desperate. The rat achieves its goal, and the protagonist ends up on the ground. Now the enemy has the advantage it needed. From a distance, Marbello uses his skills to try to assist, casting a spell. But he notices the rats are not near him, because they've all gone after Kong. He sees what the protagonist is about to do, and tells him not to do it. Even so, Kong uses a regeneration potion. The system alerts that his health is recovering due to the regeneration potion's effect. For a certain period, health recovery is sustained. Kong manages his health with this. But now he needs to eliminate the enemy before the potion's effect wears off. While fighting the rat, he ends up being bitten on the leg. However, he takes advantage of the enemy's proximity to grab it again, and with a blade, Kong strikes. After that, the rat throws him far away. Due to the bite, Kang's regeneration and potion effects were nullified. Bleeding to death was the last thing he wanted, so Kong uses his hemostasis skill to stop the bleeding. Meanwhile, he thinks about how the rat is indeed intelligent, strategizing and increasing its damage output by twofold. With this, he realizes he must ration his mana and avoid overexertion. Afterward, the rat charges at him, and the protagonist decides that, instead of using mana, he'll opt for close combat. And as he approaches, he uses the incision to make his attack more precise. With the knife at the rat's neck, the protagonist makes a precise cut, enough to kill the monster. Kong thinks his arms and legs are fine, and so far, he's not worried about his ankle. But he thought he would die this time. Then, his system triggers an alert, saying he successfully completed the task of defeating a rare monster. It even mentions a reward, which pleases him greatly. Marbello is also overjoyed, as he still believes the protagonist is some kind of deity, even though he almost dissipated from one healing spell. The protagonist is eager to find out what reward the roulette holds. After spinning it, the system mentions he has won a new ability called Throw, which has combat benefits. At first, Kong is not too excited, but he takes a closer look at the benefits, and concludes that if he throws a dark instant death poison with a 1% chance, this means there's up to a 25% chance with the bonus. With that, he feels satisfied. Marbello approaches, and Kong praises his work. The boy says he survived thanks to the protagonist, and will take what happened there to the grave. Kong tells him to stop with the nonsense, and help the others get up. Thus, he does so and uses a resurrection skill. Gradually, the fallen members rise, and they don't quite understand what happened. Periol wakes up and finds himself face to face with the dead rat, startled. Sarcastically, Kong asks if he had a good nap. Periol still doesn't understand what happened and asks if Kong dealt with the rat. The protagonist responds that a monster like that wouldn't die of natural causes. Still confused, Periol wonders if Kong really handled it all by himself. The protagonist simply charges 300,000 gold per person, as he had mentioned earlier. Periol says he remembers and will pay him. Moreover, there's something else the protagonist wants. He goes over to the rat's body, thinking it holds what he wanted from the start. After extracting the rare item from the monster, Kong feels satisfied, as his task is complete. After returning, Kong receives the payment and mentions feeling a bit guilty for accepting so much, but Periol says it's fair for what he did. As a thank you, Kong offers to buy them a drink, but one of the members says they plan to return home the next day, and drinking doesn't seem like a good idea. Periol says they're from the same village and will travel together, and since they almost had a group funeral for trying to earn so much money, now they want to take a break from adventuring for a while. The protagonist knows it's uncommon to earn so much money from adventuring in such a short time. Besides, the work is very risky, which is why they want to stop for a bit. They say their goodbyes, and Periol tells Kong he can buy them a drink next time. Feeling lonely, Kong asks if the boy drinks alcohol, but he replies that he doesn't. So Kong says that from the next day onward they'll live as if they've never met each other. Marbello understands and says Kang's secret is safe with him. As he leaves, he says that to reach the level of the great Kong, he'll have to train much harder. And Kong thinks he turned a simple boy into a complete lunatic. But even so, he cannot help him. First, the protagonist wants to check the details of the relic he obtained. So, he goes to a relic appraiser. Upon arriving at the shop, he is greeted by the owner. The protagonist knows that after obtaining a rare item from a monster, it can only be used after passing through this place. Thus, he says he wishes to appraise an item. Then he shows the pearl he got from the rat. From the appraiser's positive reaction, Kong concludes the item is better than he initially thought. Soon, the appraiser begins the process, and with his skills, he evaluates the item. After a brief period with the sphere, he finishes with the analysis results. He says the sphere is a C-rank talisman imbued with a short lifespan. The low rank surprises the protagonist. Then, the appraiser states that the item's market price is approximately 80,000 gold, but if Kong sells it there, he could receive 120,000 gold. The protagonist takes a vial from his inventory, and drips a liquid onto the sphere. The appraiser asks what he is doing. Kong mentions Latasia's potion, saying it's quite popular in the north as a substance that glows when it comes into contact with blood. He also says he used his knife to kill the rare monster moments before, and that, even if cleaned with water, the potion reveals blood that's invisible to the naked eye. Thus, an item retrieved from a monster's body should glow more than a simple knife. However, that's not the case. For that reason, Kong grabs the appraiser by the hair, and slams his head on the table. With the impact of the blow, several items fall to the ground. The appraiser screams in pain, his face drenched in potion, and tells the protagonist that he is making a terrible mistake since his establishment is under the Adventurers Guild and, therefore, credible. The protagonist says he's right, and sarcastically thanks him for his concern. After roughing up the appraiser a bit, Kong uses a skill to stop the bleeding, and says that, thinking about it, he realized he hasn't introduced himself yet. He then introduces himself as Kong Sung-yoon. Still holding the appraiser, Kong recalls a well-known saying on the continent of Azel. It states that if someone is going to deceive a healer, they shouldn't get caught. There are two types of healers, those who carry relics and are immensely skilled, and bad men who hunt monsters for fun. At this point, the appraiser fears he'll be beaten and healed repeatedly until Kong feels satisfied. He couldn't sense any divine power from Kong, but he knows the man is dangerous. The protagonist asks for the truth about the item, and the appraiser reveals it's a rank A mind concentration ring. Its market value is approximately 6.4 million gold. Kong remarks that the appraiser had the audacity to offer such a low price before being caught. He then asks why the item is so expensive. The appraiser explains that Kong must know that mages are finished once they are mentally broken. The item is valuable in many ways, which is why it's so costly. Kong realizes the item is indeed excellent, so he decides to remove the item from the display and purchase a talisman as well. After that, the protagonist heads to a tavern. While others drink in groups, he enters alone, thinking he's worked hard and deserves a drink. Inside, however, one of the attendants says there are no empty chairs left. She suggests he either join an occupied table or look for another tavern. He doesn't like the idea much, but someone recognizes him and calls him doctor. Kang immediately realizes. It's Kim Hojong, an old acquaintance. Kim remarks that it's been a while since they last met. The protagonist mentions it's probably been around 2 months. His friend says Kang is in luck because right now, he has plenty of money. Kang asks how much exactly. Kim replies, 2 million in gold. Overjoyed, he tells Kang to order whatever he wants, he'll pay for it. However, the protagonist only accepts a beer. He then shows the menu and suggests Kim order the establishment's most expensive drink. But his friend says that's way too expensive, so Kang says he'll order it himself. Kim is stunned that Kang actually ordered the item. The protagonist says it's because of his momentary streak of luck. His friend asks if he drank a stamina potion, mentioning how tricky it is to manage that statistic. Kang agrees with him, because he knows stamina differs from health and only recovers with rest. It doesn't need a potion for that. But without stamina, there's no mana. Still, he's been used to this from the beginning, thinking it might be because he's not a native of Azel. However, other dimensional travelers, like Kim Hojong, have mana as usual. Kim teases him about being better at something, and Kang admits it's not all bad since mana recovery potions are very expensive. Then Kim proposes a toast to guys with crazy concepts, those who survived the continent of Azel with their damned skills. They toast. Kim notes that expensive drinks really are different from the regular ones and says he'll drink it all by himself. Kang is fine with that, and mentions he's looking for something important. His friend asks what it is, but Kang says there are too many curious ears around. Kim realizes it must be something truly important. After that, Kang disables the good communication skill. Kim asks what Kang has that's so important. Could it be a way back home? But Kang replies that he's thinking of something much bigger. What he actually means is that he recently acquired a new unique skill. A skill with a black star called Launch. Kim asks if the skill's name really included a star. Kang says yes, and it's also the first time he's seen anything like it. Furthermore, its effects are much better than regular skills. Kim wonders if he should hunt a rare monster alone too. Kang wants to know if Kim knows anything about it. His friend reveals that some time ago, he met a team member who had a skill with a black star. The protagonist asks who this person might be, but Kim doesn't quite remember the name though. In any case, he was an incredibly strong guy. Even though he was a dimensional traveler like Kim, this man's abilities were truly extraordinary. After he defeated several enemies on his own, Kim asked him what he did to become stronger. He replied that he had an upgraded ability with Black Star in its name, and on the last day of the mission, he suddenly started yelling about a fourth ability, something that could be useful for returning home. This information intrigues the protagonist. After leaving, Kang thanks him for the meal. His friend says that next time, he'll buy 2 bottles of honey wine. Kang likes the idea. Kim says he's going back to his routine and asks Kang what he plans to do. Kang replies that he plans to buy some potions before heading back. His friend then bids him farewell, saying he hopes to see him again soon. Kang returns the kindness, telling him to travel safely. In his mind, Kang reflects on what his friend said earlier, realizing he needs to gather 4 Black Star abilities, because with that, a certain change might occur. This means he absolutely must collect them all. If it's a clue about how to return home, he wants to know how the man mentioned by his friend managed to acquire the 4 abilities. However, thinking about this makes him forget something more pressing. For now, he needs to gather points for tomorrow, which is the best time to perform good deeds. In the plaza of Hanged Village, some people are a bit surprised. Someone has put up a poster offering healing services and mentions accepting payments other than money. Next to the poster, the protagonist announces he's offering his services at a fair price. A person approaches and asks if he's a healer. Kang replies that he is. But another person appears, and claims to know Kang, accusing him of being a fake healer without a badge. To some, this makes sense because he really does have the look of a scammer, and shouldn't dare to offer such fake services so brazenly. As a result, the area in front of the sign clears out, as all potential clients leave. However, a woman approaches. The protagonist welcomes her, thinking that his real clients aren't adventurers but people like her. The woman asks if he truly accepts payments other than money. She says she has some potatoes and wants to offer them in exchange for his service. Kang agrees and asks if she's injured. She replies that she is and hurt her arm while working on the farm. She explains she had to take over the plowing position because the previous person became gravely ill and died. The protagonist identifies that it might be tetanus since no vaccine for it exists in that world, making it a dreadful way to die. For now, he wants to check her arm with his identification ability active. He sees that the wound was indeed caused by a plowing tool, and the infection is severe, with a risk of spreading quickly through her body. But luckily, it's not tetanus. He tells her the wound isn't too serious. Then he takes a remedy from his table and hands it to her, saying that if she uses it, she'll feel much better. She was expecting a potion or something similar, but the doctor says it's called medicinal cream. She just needs to apply it in the morning, after breakfast, and ensure she always uses clean bandages. This reminds him of something. He suddenly runs off and asks her to wait a moment. Not having bandages on hand, he remembers he can make some himself, using his crafting ability. He wants to provide a complete service and deliver some extra bandages to her because he knows bandages are quite expensive for the people there. With that, the woman becomes deeply grateful and blesses him for his generosity. The protagonist, however, can only think about the stars, and as soon as she leaves, he checks his system points. Shortly after helping her, more people come to his booth seeking treatment in exchange for household items. Thanks to the woman's word of mouth, he was able to help many people and consequently earn some points, accumulating about 172. This makes the protagonist feel as if he's on cloud 9. Fighting and killing monsters isn't something he particularly enjoys, and treating people generates a much higher number of points than hunting. Thus, Kong concludes that he wants to receive more clients like this regularly. But by a twist of fate, a furious man immediately arrives, asking if he calls that a shop just because he treats a few injured people. Then the stranger demands some potions. Kong notices that he's already causing a commotion in his shop. In his mind, he wonders who this scoundrel is, but he tries to stay calm and asks the man what kind of potion he desires. In his arrogance, the man replies that he wants one of every potion Kong has. The protagonist doesn't like the man's attitude at all. Judging by his behavior, he must be the son of a noble or something similar, but Kong wonders why someone like that would visit his shop. Kong mentions that he doesn't even know what illness the man has. However, the cream is the only product left in his stock. The noble remarks that it was Kong after all and tells him to consider himself a lucky doctor, because he identifies himself as the healer Yarev, the third son of the Yarev family. The protagonist recognizes the name and remembers that the Yarev family is the most prominent noble house in the region. He asks what brought them there, and the guard apologizes for not speaking sooner. The truth is that the head of the Yarev family would like to officially commission Kang's services. The protagonist wonders why someone so important would care about him. Meanwhile, the noble questions why the guard accompanied him, claiming he could have resolved this alone. But the guard says the order came from the leader. The young master then tosses a package to the protagonist. Kong asks what it is, and the arrogant nobleman says it should be obvious, calling him a stupid beggar. The guard explains that the package contains specific ingredients for crafting medicinal items sourced from Taze. By Taze, Kong assumes he means the polluted western zone. Taze is a region renowned for its natural beauty but is riddled with poisonous gas due to roots contaminating the soil for unknown reasons. The family superintendent overseeing the area attempts to minimize the damage by killing the monsters spreading the poison. Kong deduces that the nobleman must be suffering from this poison. The guard confirms it, saying the nobleman is severely ill and bedridden, requiring a potion from the doctor. And because the nearest place selling antidotes is far away, things have become quite complicated. Now Kong understands their true motive for visiting him. He knows cream-based antidotes are more effective than liquid potions, and he is the only one capable of making such a product. If he understands correctly, he confirms that the Lord urgently needs him to prepare an antidote. The arrogant nobleman replies that if he has any brain at all, he is indeed correct. And if he impresses his father, Kong could even have his own shop. In other words, the noble implies that someone like Kong would become so wealthy that he'd owe eternal gratitude to his father. Kong responds that it would be an honor, and the noble tells him to get started on the potion immediately. With a smile, Kong declares that he refuses. The two are left dumbfounded, especially the arrogant one, who dislikes what he hears and demands Kong repeat himself. Once again, Kong states that he refuses, and the nobleman rises in fury. The nobleman then says this isn't the kind of proposal a simple doctor like Kong can reject, as his father is offering him the chance of a lifetime. Kong replies that they sought the wrong person and claims he's not a pharmacist. In his thoughts, he considers that he could make a lot of money if he accepted the task, but once he started, it would never end. Besides, his priority now is earning points. And most importantly, he tells the nobleman that if he's going to ask someone for a favor, he should fix his attitude and be less arrogant. The nobleman is about to insult Kong in every possible way, but he is interrupted by people seeking the doctor's help. A boy presents his injured younger brother and begs for assistance. Kong notices that the boy's condition is severe. The injury came from a sharp scythe and risks necrosis if left untreated. Blood vessels, nerves, and ligaments were all cleanly severed. The finger is hanging by a thread. To begin, Kong wants to clean the wound thoroughly, as the scythe being a farming tool increases the risk of complications. The older brother asks if this means Kong can treat him. The nobleman, still lingering, remarks that watching this is amusing. The boy recognizes him as Lord Liart. Liart states that the protagonist is a doctor who uses potions for illnesses, but now he's faced with a wound that can't be healed that way. Liart then summons his healing ability, declaring that this is how a real healer cures someone. Until now, the protagonist didn't realize Liart was a healer. Kang suggests that perhaps young Master Lihart could help, but Lihart asks why he would. He says someone like the boy's brother couldn't afford his services. However, he says he is willing to overlook the protagonist's transgressions, and if the protagonist agrees to do as his family commands, he will offer his mercy and help the plebeian boy. The protagonist knows that a noble would never help a commoner under normal circumstances, but he also knows that Lihart is after the healing potion for his father, no matter what. Thus, he rejects the young master's offer and says he will take care of the boy on his own. Lihart asks how he plans to do that. Kang simply replies that he is going to stitch the boy back together. He has what he needs for disinfection and hemostasis. Thinking he's lucky to have prepared a saline solution in advance, Lihart asks if he plans to treat the boy like a doll or something because he doesn't believe such a task will be easy to accomplish. The protagonist tells him to leave if he's just going to be annoying. In his arrogance, Lihart says he will bet his fortune necklace that Kang can't fix the boy's finger. The protagonist understands and suggests that instead of the necklace, Lihart should provide food for the plebeians for 3 consecutive days. Thinking Kang is a fraud, Lihart agrees, but he adds that if Kang fails, he must not only create the antidote but also promise never to act as a healer again. The protagonist agrees and says he will sew the boy back up. However, under normal circumstances, it would be more complicated using standard thread. Kang activates his thread generation skill. With it, he uses mana threads that allow for better sutures than regular threads. With his observant eyes, he examines the boy's hand. Lihart watches the process, thinking it's all a waste of time, certain that Kang won't succeed. But they are all surprised. The protagonist has learned some rules while working irregularly, and rule number 5 is, never rely solely on system skills, but use all the experience you've acquired. Finger reimplantation would typically be an advanced surgery, but with the protagonist's skills, it is feasible, though connecting each nerve drains a lot of his mana. This is where his rare item, the ring, comes into play. Thanks to the ring's effects, he has plenty of mana. Now, all he has to do is seal. However, the protagonist notices his stamina is very low. He fears he might not have enough to finish the process, and hopes his stamina won't run out before completing the surgical procedure. With his mana pots nearly empty, he nonetheless keeps stitching, and after some time, he completes the surgery. To the joy of the boy's brother, and the dismay of the arrogant noble, the protagonist barely had enough stamina left to finish. Exhausted, he drinks something to recover, and finally, he uses one of his skills to accelerate the boy's recovery. And so, the treatment is complete. Lihart is furious about it, saying there's no way what just happened could be real. In response, the protagonist suggests he see for himself. Lihart approaches the boy and uses his resurrection skill. The boy wakes from his coma, and Kang asks if the patient can hear him. If so, he asks the boy to slowly move his finger. The boy does so, moving it normally. The protagonist asks if that is proof enough, but Lihart still can't believe it. Next, Kang mentions their earlier agreement, and asks if Lihart is considering breaking the promise he made in his family's name. Lihart grows angry at the doctor's audacity, and enraged throws the necklace to the ground. As he leaves, Kang comments that the noble could at least have been more polite. Regardless, he keeps the necklace. The boy's brother thanks him for the treatment, asking if Kang believes Lihart will honor his promise. Kang says yes because the head of the house won't let it slide, and advises the boy to spread the word, and tell everyone to go to the plaza for free treatment and food. Back at the Vitsball Inn, Julia asks if Mr. Kang has heard the latest news. Kang pretends not to know what she's talking about, but Julia insists on telling him, saying the young master of House Yarev built a medical center and is distributing free food in the city's central plaza. The protagonist comments that it's a good thing, and Julia asks if that doesn't mean he'll have fewer patients to treat. However, Kang says it's fine because, as long as people are treated, he'll be satisfied. She says that Kang has a big heart, and the look she gives him when she says it brightens his day. Then, he mentions that he received some potatoes as payment, and asks her to prepare something with them. The girl agrees and says she'll make something delicious with them. He thanks her and laments not being able to help with the preparation. After that, he checks his status again and notices he has leveled up significantly, but it's still not enough. He knew he wouldn't achieve everything he needed in just one day of work. At least he managed to get something good, a vitality crystal and an inventory expansion ticket. He decides to use it immediately. The system alerts him that he now has more storage space for items. Additionally, he has a stamina crystal. His friend Kim shows up, surprising him. Kim says the food there is good. He then shows a crystal enhancement ticket he obtained earlier, and hands it to the protagonist. Kang tells him that he could sell it for a considerable amount of gold. Kim asks if he doesn't want it. Kang says he does and accepts it gratefully. His friend notices that the protagonist hasn't sold the ring and asks if he plans to use it. Kang replies that he's just waiting for the right moment to sell. Moreover, the item's value is quite high, so he can't sell it at just any shop. Kim then recommends a store to his friend, and talks about a weapon shop he knows. A while later, the protagonist visits the shop, but upon arrival, he notices the place doesn't look very impressive. Still, the shop owner greets him. Kang shows the item he wants to sell. When the owner sees the necklace, he notes a small crack in the crystal. The protagonist recalls that the previous owner had thrown it violently on the ground, likely causing the damage. The shopkeeper says he could get about 3 million gold for it, but the protagonist expected more. Then Kang shows the ring and asks how much it would sell for. The merchant realizes the protagonist possesses a rare item. However, he apologizes, saying he'll need to consult his sales records. Meanwhile, Kang decides to browse the shop's other items. While looking, the protagonist notices several weapons he could use. One crossbow catches his attention because it's something he can use from a distance. He considers asking the vendor for more details about it, but as he moves his hand toward the item, a bright light flashes in his system. An alert prompts him to pick up the item. The protagonist doesn't quite understand why his system is asking him to grab the crossbow. He's received many system messages before, but none have instructed him to do something like this. It's almost as if the system has been watching him all along. Suddenly, the vendor calls out, asking if Kang has found something important. However, the protagonist says he was just lost in thought. He then asks if there's something special about the crossbow. The vendor explains that the crossbow is called Freya, and he recently discovered it while scavenging some ruins. It comes with a bag that forms a set. If an item is placed in the bag, it transforms the object into an arrow. The protagonist is intrigued, but the shop owner demonstrates, showing that it can shoot up to 5 arrows in succession. Kang thinks it must be very expensive and asks how much it costs. The vendor states the price is 15 million gold, and the protagonist realizes he definitely can't afford it. However, if he wants to buy it now, the vendor offers to reduce the price to 14 million. The protagonist asks how much the ring would sell for. The vendor says approximately 6.6 million gold, which is the amount he'd pay. Kang realizes that even if he sold both items, he'd only earn about 9 million, which still wouldn't be enough to purchase the crossbow. Still, he tries talking to the system. He says that if it's listening, he'd like to receive 4 million gold. But Kang gets no response. He figures that perhaps the amount he's asking for is too high. The vendor notices Kang's interest in the item but assumes he doesn't have enough money, so he offers to reserve it for him. Kang asks if that would be okay. The vendor says it's not a problem and, judging by the items Kang brought in, he's sure he'll eventually be able to pay the full price for the crossbow. With this, the protagonist understands why Kim recommended this shop and thanks the vendor for his attention. The shopkeeper asks if he needs anything else, and Kang mentions a brooch accessory. Afterward, he heads to the Adventurers Guild headquarters, already wearing his vitality brooch. He uses his skills to earn points. However, to earn gold, he still has to check the guild's notice board, just like any other adventurer. The protagonist even tried borrowing money from his friend Kim, but he only had 5,000 gold, as he ended up poorer than Kang. Kim asks if they are close to going home. Kang responds that he's not sure yet but has a lead. He thinks that, for the first time in 3 long years, the system spoke to him, the entity that dragged them there. As soon as he obtains the beast, the protagonist believes it will be possible to establish communication with the system, and he intends to keep his friend updated. Given that, Kang thinks he must earn more money and dives into the crowd to find a mission to his liking. Among many options, he finds a request for a healer. However, as soon as he grabs the flyer, the person in charge apologizes to Kang, and says that this mission is only available for guild-certified healers. Even if he accepts it, he may not receive the reward. The protagonist tells her not to worry as he was just taking a look. But upon closer inspection, she notices that the mission is already in progress. Kang also realizes this, and sees that it even includes the address he needs to go to. Thus, Kang heads to his favorite tavern, and Julia asks if he forgot something, as he just left there. However, Kang replies that he's just looking for someone. He finds who he's looking for in one of the rooms and notices that there's already another healer present. A priest, in the name of Ivert, is about to perform the healing process. The protagonist thinks it's unusual for priests to accept commissions for tasks tied to the Adventurers Guild, so he must be acting independently. A woman says that Lena, the patient, is very weakened, and the priest suggests removing the bandages. Khan uses his observer eye skill, and identifies all the details of the wound. His system reveals that the wound has a distinctive bite mark. The priest is about to act, when the protagonist interrupts him. He asks who Kang is. The protagonist introduces himself as Dr. Kang and apologizes for the interruption, but says it's pointless to use healing magic on her now. The priest asks if Kang is implying he knows more about healing than he does. The protagonist clarifies that he didn't mean to offend but to help, and he doesn't doubt the priest's abilities. The woman assisting mentions that if Kang is also a healer, he should be aware of his colleague's condition. and if he won't help, she asks him not to waste their time further and to leave. Khan insists that, as he said, the treatment the priest is offering won't help her. However, the woman becomes angry and tries to expel him. After leaving her room, the protagonist laments that the woman didn't listen, as he tried to warn her that healing would do nothing for her condition. The priest insists on performing the healing, but he doesn't understand why it isn't working. The patient's wound seems to worsen, and her companion asks what's happening, as her bleeding isn't stopping. She's beginning to realize the protagonist was right, and questions her decision to hire a priest associated with the sect. Crying, Lizzie wonders, if he can't help, who else could? Lena calls out to her, and Lizzie asks what's wrong. She mentions the healer from earlier, and says he seemed to know something. Maybe he's capable of healing her wound. Lizzie, however, says he seems suspicious. Lena says she doesn't think she'll survive much longer on potions, and as she holds her hand, Lizzie notices her companion is already growing cold. This motivates her to seek out the healer from before. Julia is working as usual when Lizzie approaches, and asks where the person who left her room earlier is. She quickly describes the protagonist's physical characteristics. Julia immediately realizes she's referring to Dr. Kong. Knowing the answer already, he asks if the priest's treatment was successful. Reluctantly, she admits that the priest failed to heal her companion and that she indeed appears to be infected with something. Next, she asks how the protagonist knew all this. Kong simply replies that he just knew, and reminds her that she treated him rudely earlier, yet now she's begging for his help. She admits her fault, saying she thought he was mocking her situation and also believed the treatments were ineffective due to the healer's lack of skill. Ashamed, Lizzie asks for forgiveness and pleads for the protagonist's help. In her thoughts, she feels the doctor has every reason to refuse, even if it would cause her companion great suffering. However, Khan has already stood up and asked why she's still bowing. He says he needs to act quickly because the patient cannot be kept waiting. Lizzie had already lost hope that he would help and was surprised by his decision. Once in the room, Kang remarks that the priest should have identified the cause of the wound before attempting to heal it. Hoi's Finn, the wandering priest, is at a loss for words. The protagonist reminds him that he warned the healing wouldn't be effective in this case. The priest then asks if Kang believes she might have been poisoned. Hoi's acknowledges that he isn't the only master in the healing arts, but he has extensively studied various types of poisons to learn how to cure them. For this reason, he is familiar with them. He insists that the patient isn't poisoned. This makes Kang think he's quite arrogant. Kang also clarifies that he never said the patient was poisoned, leaving the priest confused. Kang asks the woman her name. She introduces herself as Lena. Next, he requests to examine the wound and inquires when she was injured. Lena responds that it happened a week ago. She explains that while hunting with her companion, she was ambushed by a large monster. Though she managed to defeat it without much trouble, the wound worsened afterward. Kang asks if they headed straight to the village after the attack. Lizzie responds that they didn't, as they were ambushed by goblins near a forest on their way. They also encountered a crocodile by a river. The priest is astonished that they went through all of that. Lastly, Lizzie says she wanted to return to their village, but her friend's condition deteriorated after everything, forcing them to stop there. Kang asks one last question, whether Lena feels any pain in her leg. She thinks about it, and says she doesn't feel anything from her leg. The priest asks why she hadn't mentioned it earlier. Lena says she just felt nauseous and hadn't paid attention to the lack of pain in her leg. This leads the priest to realize that something stranger is at play, and he deduces it could be dark magic. He explains that dark magic opposes his holy magic, which now makes sense as to why his treatment wasn't working. However, Kang dismisses this theory, stating it's not dark magic. If it were, she would have been harmed when exposed to holy magic. Kang then reveals the true cause of the wound. Using his spray skill, Kang applies the cure. The priest notices that Kang's potion turns into a mysterious mist and is impressed, as he's never seen anything like it before. Afterward, the bleeding in Lena's leg stops immediately. Kang mentions the interior mint concentrate, claiming that when it comes to dealing with insects, there's nothing better than this potion. Lena is puzzled by his mention of insects. The protagonist points out that, upon closer inspection of her leg, a tiny insect bite mark can be seen. Recalling their earlier mention of passing through Mika Swamp, Kang immediately knew the answer, as it's the natural habitat of certain specific insects. On the same day, Lena was injured, and they failed to provide first aid. The same applied to Lizzie. Lena asks why Lizzie wasn't affected in the same way. Lizzie remembers being scratched on her cheek, while her companion was struck on the leg. Then, she recalls that both of them crossed the river, and Lena exposed her wound to the water, unlike Lizzie. Kang confirms this, explaining that the original injury occurred in the swamp but worsened in the water, becoming infected by the insects. Since her leg was contaminated, the priest's healing couldn't take effect. Now, everything makes sense to him. Lizzie asks if Lena will be okay now, but Kang says no, as he only performed a simple and temporary treatment. The fact that Lena doesn't feel pain in her leg is due to certain insects producing an anesthetic effect, a sophisticated adaptation for an insect. Using a knife, Kong makes an incision in her leg. He explains that among these insects, none die from just one dose of medicine. Suddenly, a large worm begins emerging from Lena's leg. As he cuts into her leg, a worm starts to come out. The girl is extremely frightened. Lizzie is also shocked by this. No one except the protagonist expected it. Khan states that this creature must be dealt with immediately. It's a highly problematic monster to leave roaming around. The priest notices that the worm changed size as it exited the leg. Somehow, the monster managed to pass through the floor. Kong becomes alert. The girls are still scared. The worm takes the opportunity to try to escape through a grate. Khan, however, tells the others to prepare their weapons quickly. Meanwhile, he charges toward the creature, to prevent it from escaping. With his knife, he tries to fight the worm. But the enemy doesn't give in easily. Khan tries to strike the monster, but he realizes it is more resilient than he expected. This is because the worm has been feeding on blood for a week. In addition to being strong, the worm is also fast, and tries desperately to escape through the sewer. Quickly, Lizzie decides to act against it. She leaps toward a cabinet, and declares she won't let it escape. Fueled by anger over everything her friend endured, she attacks the worm, saying she cannot let it escape after harming Lena. However, the monster prepares to retaliate, until Kong steps in to help her, and kicks the worm away. Next, he plans to kill it with his knife, but as he strikes, Kong realizes the worm uses blood as energy. Thus, he needs to attack it with greater intensity, forcing it to burn through all its stored blood and leaving it without energy. Kong even notices that the worm is already shrinking, and that it's only a matter of time before it runs out of energy. Realizing it is losing the fight, the worm seeks another escape route, and locates a window. It moves toward the window in an attempt to flee, until Kong sees it pass through, and apologizes to Julia for the damage. Seeing the monster escape, Kong thinks there will be no way to track it if it reaches the village aqueduct, and he cannot afford to lose sight of it. Using one of his mint potions, he hits the enemy, amplifying the damage with his skills. Noticing that the worm is weaker, Kong prepares to attack. As he gets closer, he sees the monster losing blood, until his system alerts him that the worm is in critical condition. Now is the opportunity the protagonist needed, as he just needs to land a critical blow. However, when he strikes the worm with his knife, the blade breaks, surprising Kong. He definitely didn't expect that. But before he can panic, the priest steps in to help, and uses his magic to bind the enemy with chains. The priest apologizes for the delay, explaining that he needed time to prepare. Then he tells Kong to act quickly, as he cannot hold it for long. The protagonist has the advantage, but without a weapon, he cannot deliver the final blow. From a distance, someone throws a dagger, and he catches it. Lizzie tells him to use it against the enemy. Now armed, Kong prepares to act, but the worm breaks free from the magical chains. Despite losing the advantage, Kong charges, and using the dagger, manages to slash the worm. By cutting it into pieces, Kong kills it for good. Kong thanks the priest for his help and asks if he'd like to keep the worm's remains, but the priest declines. So, the protagonist decides to keep them for himself. Afterward, he finishes treating the patient's leg, performing excellent suturing. Lizzie is impressed by the doctor's skills. The protagonist assures Lena that she doesn't need to worry about her injured leg for a long time, as he infused the process with mana containing defensive properties. Lena thought she was going to die, but now she is very happy and grateful for the doctor's help. Kong simply says he was just doing his job as a healer. Now he has to submit a report, but he knows he shouldn't have taken the job, as he can't receive payment for it since he's not certified. So, he asks the priest to submit the report on his behalf, and collect the mission's reward. At the Adventurers Guild, the priest announces that he failed the mission. The receptionist is puzzled and asks him to repeat. He does, again saying he failed to complete the assigned mission. She remarks that he is one of the best priests in the religious order of Ivert, and asks how he could fail a mission like that. She looks at the protagonist and assumes he is the reason for all this. As the mission contractor, Lizzie asks if she can obtain a refund. The receptionist confirms that she can, and Lizzie is delighted by this. According to the guild's policy, the remuneration that would have been paid for fulfilling the contract can be refunded, and the mission request is removed from the board. Khan knows that, even if he cannot secure higher commissions through standard channels, he is still free to interfere with commissions withdrawn by the guild. This makes some people quite unhappy, as they don't agree with this practice. Some even go as far as pointing fingers at those who engage in it. Khan doesn't understand why there's so much hostility about it. To him, what he does is a fair and honest way to earn money. After negotiating with the union representative, Lizzie hands Kong the reward money. She mentions that it includes the guild's portion, making it more than what he would have earned if he had completed the mission under normal circumstances. The protagonist thanks her, saying he really needed it. Then, Khan tries to return her knife, but Lizzie insists it now belongs to him. Khan notes that the blade is made of silver and is quite useful. Lizzie says she received it in her hometown when she became an adventurer. Because of this, the protagonist asks if she's sure about giving away such an important item. She replies that she feels bad about how she received his help, and this is her way of giving back. Besides, she says her friend's life is more important than a simple knife. In that case, Khan graciously accepts the gift, happy that everything turned out well. He also says that if she ever needs his services again, he'll give her a 10% discount. Afterward, the protagonist calculates his earnings and realizes he now has 2 million gold. To buy the crossbow he wants, he's still short by another 2 million. Next, he checks the system roulette. Using 100 points, he spins it, hoping to get something good. Khan knows he needs money, but instead, the system grants him a new skill. It's called air, which allows him to create potions of that type. With this, the protagonist realizes he can now craft wind potions and doesn't think it's such a bad outcome. Then, he heads to the medical cabin. It was built in the center of the village. Right away, the person in charge recognizes the doctor's voice. Lape, the apothecary, tells him he can take whatever he needs. However, Khan says he wants to sell, not buy. Lape tells him to stop joking and just say what he wants. But Khan asks why she prefers customers who buy rather than those who sell. He also mentions that he caught a worm earlier. Lape asks if Khan went to the swamp to catch it. He replies that, in a way, he did. Because of the creature's damage, Lape says she can't pay full price for the worm. But something about the monster catches her attention. Khan then asks what price she's offering. He was expecting something around 300 gold. However, Lape asks how he feels about 3 million. The protagonist remarks that she said she wouldn't pay full price and jokes if she has a thing for leeches. Lape doesn't like the joke. She explains that due to the worm's uncommon body coloration, it's a variant of a black swamp leech. A variant is a monster that has mutated, generally making it more resilient and powerful than its normal counterpart. Khan asks what makes this worm different from a regular one. Lape replies that a rare monster without its relic is useless as an ingredient. However, the corpse of a variant can be used to craft valuable relics. A worm like this is so rare that it can be considered high class. Khan notes that's why she's so eager to have it. Then, Lape asks what he'll do. Khan responds that he wants to sell, just as he said earlier. The deal is struck, and Lape comments that this is why she likes the doctor. He replies that the feeling is mutual. Immediately, the protagonist heads to the weapons shop. After walking up to the counter, he places a bag containing 14 million gold, as agreed. The vendor asks if he's sure. Khan responds that from the moment he saw the crossbow, he was certain he needed it. Then, he asks if it's still available. The vendor retrieves the weapon and hands it to Khan, who thanks him. Now that he's finally made the purchase, the protagonist tries speaking to his system, asking if it's satisfied now that he has the crossbow in his hands. He then demands the system reveal itself again as it did before, but nothing happens. Back in his room at the inn, Khan wonders if he should do something more than just holding the item. He pulls out the crossbow he just acquired, but unlike what happened in the shop, the system finally reacts, announcing that it's been saved to his inventory. This was the moment he was waiting for. However, immediately after, another screen appears from the system. The protagonist is utterly confused because there is no message. So he asks what is wrong with the system. He shouts in his room, telling the system to stop just watching and show up already, because he just wants to talk and clear up some of his many doubts. However, only a black star appears on the screen. Khan asks if this item represents the one observing him. The system responds that he now understands. Moreover, it states that it will answer 5 of his questions. When Khan was transported to the Azul continent, other people were also transported, and after some time, they died inside a cave. Among them, there were many disagreements about staying there or returning home. The protagonist argued that, regardless of their choice, they needed money to survive, so they would have to find work there and learn some skills as well. And after they separated and got used to this world, those who managed to find a way back to Earth should do so without hesitation. 3 years later, the system presented itself to the protagonist, and now he sees this as a possibility to find a way back home. Since the messages are brief, Khan imagines that the system must have its limitations and cannot answer complex questions. Thus, he must be careful when clarifying his doubts, as he doesn't want to waste the opportunity. First, he asks if he is speaking with the entity that brought everyone to the Azul continent. The system counts this as the first question but does not answer. So Khan asks who he is speaking with and what it wants. But once again, he gets no answer to his question. Then he realizes that perhaps he can only get yes or no answers. For his next question, he asks if there is a way to return to his homeland, and the system answers positively. Khan asks if anyone from his group has managed to return to Earth, and the answer is no. From this, the protagonist concludes that even his friend Kim's acquaintance didn't manage to return home. Thus, the only way for the protagonist to get more information through yes or no questions is by being smart. He doubts that they were brought to this realm without a reason. Whoever is behind this must have some purpose. Kong writes the questions in his notebook and asks for the answers. He thinks there are only 4 ways the system responds through messages. If the answer is number 1, it will respond with O, but if it's number 2, it will respond with X. If the answer isn't listed, there will be no response for 5 minutes. Then the system responds positively. Finally, the protagonist asks what is most relevant. He views it in simple terms, imagining that they were brought there along with others just to serve as slaves. This thought infuriates him, but looking at it objectively, if he is the only one who has figured this out, it means he is closer to reaching his goal. The protagonist says that whatever the system is doing is none of his business, but at the very least, he wants to know its identity. With that, he asks if he is speaking with the deity of the Azul continent. Khan had no more pressing questions, so he decided to ask this, saying that if the system wants to help, it should be honest in its response. Instead, a system screen appears saying that 52 points have been consumed. Immediately, the protagonist grows concerned. His points keep decreasing, and Khan panics until he reaches 0. Now he feels lost, as he didn't expect this to happen. Angrily, he declares that he will kill whoever is behind the system, deity or not. Then, a mission appears, offering 5,000 points as a reward. Additionally, the reward includes a black star ability, something unprecedented for the protagonist. He realizes his points were taken but intends to return them with interest through the mission, using what he already has to manage the system. Communication between him and the system has been difficult from the start, but Khan is still willing to complete the mission as long as the promised reward is paid. He thought of many names he could use to call the system, but since it only communicates through a message window, he decides to nickname it Administrator from now on. Sometime later, Khan returns to the inn, and while having a snack at his favorite tavern, he enjoys what he's eating, savoring every bite. He thinks yesterday's harvest was satisfying. In addition to everything that happened, he received a new skill linked to Freya's beast. With the exclusive bow skill, Khan thinks it's not bad to add it to his other skills and use them in combination. Checking the system, he notices a new option called Freya's roulette, and he still has points to use it. It's an exclusive roulette for the crossbow, operating separately from the conventional roulette. So, he decides to use it immediately. After spinning Freya's roulette, Khan waits for his reward. To his surprise, the system grants him excellent rewards. Even though Freya is a limited crossbow, it provided him with initial boosts and a skill. It also grants extra points for every soul point earned. He starts imagining how great it would be if every roulette spin were like this. Suddenly, his friend Kim Hojong appears. Khan was just about to look for him. He asks Kim for a moment of his time to discuss something of interest. After hearing what the protagonist has to say, Kim lets out a loud shout. He asks if Kong is serious, as he can hardly believe that they were both captured just to become point generators. Kong confirms that it's true. Still, Kim feels relieved, as he thought he would die without ever setting foot in his hometown again. But before jumping to conclusions, Kong tells him there's more. He explains that while he heard part of Kim's explanation, he realizes he needs to work hard to earn the necessary points. Kim asks if his friend is struggling to gain points. Kong responds that he just has to heal wounds, but self-inflicted wounds don't count. Instead, healing an ally does, and if he heals an ally's injuries in the field, he can earn points quickly. His friend now understands. Kong wants him to be his helper. The protagonist needs a temporary team, as dimensional travelers familiar with the status screen system make good assistants, and he needs someone he can trust. Among such people, Kim is the only one who fits the bill, and there's no one else available right now. Kim seems to like the idea. He agrees enthusiastically to help Kong. Kong had expected him to agree without hesitation. What he didn't expect was for his friend to do something extreme. Kim takes a knife and cuts himself. He wants the doctor to heal him so he can gain some points. However, the protagonist explains that healing self-inflicted wounds doesn't generate points. He then clarifies that Kim only needs to help him face some monsters. Kim asks if they need to be so hasty, but Kong replies that everyone should live diligently. At the Adventurers Union headquarters, the receptionist welcomes Kim for his first visit. She's surprised, though, to see him accompanied by the protagonist. Judging by her expression, Kong assumes she's still upset about his last visit, where a contract was broken due to his actions. She considers hiding the healer contracts from him, and her frustration is evident even to Kim. However, they aren't there for healer contracts. They're looking for monster hunting jobs. Soon, some contracts catch Kang's attention. He notes that, for some reason, there are many contracts linked to the Belet Mountains region. Kim explains that it's because of a sudden surge in monster appearances. The receptionist overhears their conversation and mentions that this is common during this time of year. As a result, the concentration of adventurers increases. During this season, they can set up tents and camps around the area, provided by the Union. Quickly, Kang sees this as an opportunity to establish a medical base and offer his services to many clients. So, he accepts the contract, which makes the receptionist quite happy. She confirms the contract and wishes them good luck. Afterward, the two travel to the Bellet Mountains region. Upon arriving at the camps, they are greeted by the Adventurers Union representative, Yahello. He explains that adventurers at the base can claim rewards for as many monsters as they capture. The western area where they are is completely safe, unlike the other regions, which are overrun with dangerous monsters. Hearing this, the protagonist is pleased, as there will be many patients to treat. With his friend Kim, he prepares to get to work. Now it's time to earn some gold. Right away, they face iron moles. The creatures have been chasing them since they left the camp. Using his crossbow, the protagonist attacks. He hits several enemies directly. For Kang, it's quite convenient not having to reload the crossbow after every shot. Additionally, its damage is very high. While distracted by his thoughts, he's caught off guard by a mole. His friend tries to warn him from afar, but Kang ends up face to face with the monster, about to be attacked. However, before it lands a blow, Kim steps in front and takes the hit. Kang becomes worried, but Kim tells him to just continue the hunt. Then, Kang's system alerts him that Freya has granted him a life regeneration arrow. Using it, he shoots Kim. At first, Kim doesn't understand why he was hit by friendly fire, but Kang explains that the effects are healing rather than harmful, and he just wanted to test them. Kim asks why Kang didn't test it on someone else. However, the protagonist doesn't have time to chat, as he already has another enemy in his sights. While Kang shoots, his friend engages the enemies in melee combat. After a while, they take down all of them. They then bring the bodies back to camp to exchange them for rewards. However, the sheer number of bodies surprises the payment officer. Regardless, he asks for some time to calculate the reward. Meanwhile, some people speculate about what kind of reward they will receive, as they see that only 2 adventurers managed to take down so many enemies, and conclude that it must be due to their skills. But noticing a bandage on Kim's face, they comment that they can't even afford a healer. This irritates Kim. Kim says they don't have a good eye for things, as they speak nonsense simply because they don't know the truth. He also asks if Kang isn't bothered by it. The protagonist responds that he doesn't need to waste his energy arguing with insignificant people, as they could very well be his future clients. Kim doesn't fully understand, but shortly after, someone shows up yelling for a healer. The protagonist is delighted, thinking patients are waiting for him. Some healers are already working in the camp, but the number of injured is so high that they can't keep up. Noticing this, Kim tells Kang there's plenty of gold to be made here, since so many patients need help. However, another healer appears, claiming the patients are reserved for him. The protagonist asks if he can take a look at the surrounding patients, but the healer asks who he is. Looking at Kang and his friends, the healer realizes who they are. So does Kim, recognizing him as the same man who dismissed them earlier. The healer refuses any assistance, insisting he can handle everything. However, Kang points out that there are many patients here, and some might not survive the wait. Kang observes one patient who wasn't gravely injured, having wounds only on his arm and shoulder. With his observer eye skill active, he identifies all the details of the injury and notices that the patient has been paralyzed from a specific attack. Kim asks what he thinks. The protagonist replies that it looks like the man was bitten by some wild animals. He also notes that his arm is paralyzed due to stiffness. Kim speculates that it might have been caused by a dog bite, but the healer claims paralysis doesn't cause pain like that. Kang states that the paralyzing venom of the local dogs is truly unique. In addition to causing specific damage, it leaves the target's flesh rotting. The venom's effect induces decomposition. Thus, the doctor sees no other option. He pulls out his crossbow from his inventory and aims it at the injured man. Seeing this, some people become enraged, demanding that Kang be stopped and calling him crazy for shooting someone in such a state. However, Kang asks Kim for help calming them down. The protagonist knows what he's doing and believes he needs to quickly apply a potion to the patient's entire body. The fastest method would be using the special arrow combined with one of his skills. This would allow the potion to flow better and faster. Believing the patient will die, some are horrified, thinking the protagonist is cruel and trying to end a poor man's life. But Kang knows he's doing the exact opposite. As soon as he shoots the arrow, the potion quickly begins to take effect on the patient. Witnessing this, some don't understand why someone who was just hit by an arrow isn't dead and is actually improving. Even the skeptical healer, who doubted Kang, is impressed by the effectiveness of his methods, admitting he's never seen anything like it. The protagonist explains that wind potions are the most effective against Bellato dogs, as wind is their weakness. Therefore, treating this person in a place with constant airflow would have guaranteed the venom's natural dissipation. Even his friend Kim didn't know this. Kim realizes the person's condition was severe because the healer closed their wounds. Kong confirms this, saying that if the healer were even slightly competent and minimally intelligent, he wouldn't have closed the wounds before curing the venom. The healer is deeply embarrassed for not achieving better results. The protagonist stands by his statement, and the humiliated healer runs away. Returning to the patient, Kong tells him that he's fine for now but must be cautious with his movements, as his body is still recovering. With that, the patient thanks the doctor for his help. However, Kim says something feels off and asks why he was left there alone. He also inquires where his group might be. Kong realizes that it indeed doesn't make sense and decides he can't leave him there alone in the middle of the night due to the cold. So, he asks where the patient's companions are. The patient replies that his group was ambushed, and everyone scattered. Thinking it over, he suspects he might be the only one among them who survived. He blames himself for running away and leaving them behind, especially when the dogs attacked in a pack. Kim, however, comments that Bellato's dogs don't usually attack in large groups. The protagonist quickly realizes something is wrong. Perhaps the sudden appearance of monsters and this man's missing group are due to a rare monster. That would make sense. It seems like all of them are trapped in some kind of dungeon. Kim asks if they could be dead. Kong says he hopes not. After following some clues about the whereabouts of the rest of the group, the protagonist hears something and stops walking, because barking is heard from afar. He then asks Kim to illuminate the area. Soon, they see a boy surrounded by dogs. Immediately, Kong prepares a wind arrow and shoots in their direction. As he approaches the boy, Kong asks if he's okay. The boy says he is. Kim calls his friend's attention, as it seems he has found the rest of the group. Getting closer, the two realize they were all killed, as they ended up entering an area infested with monsters. And Kim notes that there are both human and animal bodies there, and judging by their state, they've been dead for some time. He says dogs prefer fresh meat, and is sure they don't pile bodies like that. However, the protagonist says that some do eat rotten meat, a dog of the rare type. Moreover, it is also undead. In this world, a corpse can rise again through the effects of dark magic, a condition despised by all priests. This has become more troublesome than the protagonist imagined. His friend asks if they'll be able to defeat the enemy, because, besides the beast being quite dangerous, it can still summon companions to help it hunt. Seeing this leaves the group's survivor quite frightened. However, Kim decides to act quickly, and prevents the boy from being attacked by the pack. But another wolf from the group catches him off guard. The protagonist sees his friend about to be struck, and uses his abilities combined with the crossbow to shoot a wind arrow in the monster's direction. Even after falling, Kim thanks him for the help, and is immediately struck by the protagonist with healing arrows. The system alerts that, as a result of the potion, his air attributes have been enhanced. With that, Kong says his friend has been vaccinated, and warns him to be more careful next time he's attacked. Even so, the wolves don't stop attacking Kim, but due to being protected by the protagonist's arrow, the wolves can't harm him. On the contrary, they grow weaker as they approach him. However, Kim notices that the pack leader is the only one not attacking and has been standing still since ordering the others to fight. It's almost as if he's waiting for his pack to die. Regardless, Kim doesn't stop attacking the enemies, but when he defeated the last one, the wolf leader howls. And with that, all the dead start rising again. The protagonist realizes the leader is a necromancer. With this ability, he can raise his dead allies whenever he wants. Kim doesn't fully understand how he does this, and says that if it continues like this, the battle will never end. Kong says the necromancy ability will stop once the pack leader dies, but they won't be able to advance with the others interfering. Kim says they need to find a way to get closer. Then, he prepares to advance, and says it's his time to shine. Kong agrees and thinks that, although Kim looks like a mediocre mage on the outside, he's actually a tank. His friend says the speed of the aggressive monsters will increase, which means they'll probably die. Still, he has faith that Dr. Kong will find a solution. With the opening Kim created, the protagonist is grateful, and says dealing with the necromancer wolf won't even be a problem, as he remembers what Luppy once said, that a rare monster's source of power is its relic. If you encounter any particularly troublesome rare monster, find its relic and destroy it. The protagonist activates the Observer's Eye skill and identifies the spot he needed on the wolf, and realizes the relic is on the monster's neck. After cutting precisely where he wanted, he uses his crossbow combined with his skills to shoot a wind arrow. However, his focus was on the leader, and the protagonist didn't notice a smaller wolf lurking and taking the chance to bite his hand, the one holding the crossbow. The situation worsens when Kong realizes that the wolf's strength was great enough to tear his hand off, separating it from his arm. His weapon falls to the ground as he tries to break free from the enemy. The leader of the wolves is more intelligent than the protagonist expected, and having been struck near the relic region, he is furious. As soon as Kong manages to free himself from the smaller wolf, the leader seizes his distraction and lunges at him, intending to devour him whole, alive. With his other hand, he tries to summon the crossbow again. Even as the wolf is about to attack, Kong feels relieved to have his system that allows him to use such tactics, and being ambidextrous, he manages to shoot the wolf leader, and finally kill it for good. The wolf's body falls on top of him, pinning him down. Kong asks where his hand ended up, and his companion brings it back to him. He thanks him, but the young man says he should be grateful and asks for permission to treat him. The protagonist asks if he's also a healer. He replies affirmatively and introduces himself as Keitel. Kong says he'll be fine and can take care of it himself. Instead of helping him, he asks Keitel to check over there. When he looks to the side, he notices survivors amidst a pile of bodies, and Kong says they need help more than he does. Meanwhile, he searches for his friend, and finds Kim under a pile of wolf corpses, asking for help to stand up. Kim thought he was about to be crushed to death, and it seems they both managed to survive somehow. However, the protagonist shows his hand detached from his arm and says that, in a way, it's minor compared to the risk they faced. He then says they should return to camp to heal and rest. Kim agrees that it's a good plan and asks what they say about cleaning the area. The protagonist says he'll call them those known as the Order of Yarev. Back at camp, in the protagonist's cabin, he tries to fix his hand. However, since only one hand works now, he struggles to sew and even uses his mouth to assist. But that's enough for him to complete the stitching entirely. Soon, he finishes the treatment, and even his friend Kim is surprised it worked. He asks why Kong didn't let the boy heal him. Kong replies he doesn't feel comfortable with other healers. Someone calls him from outside, and Kong goes to meet them. Kim temporarily bids him farewell, saying he'll get some rest. Outside, a man introduces himself as Colonel Axelo, from the Hind village and a member of the Church of Ivert. The protagonist thinks that, based on his clothing, it's obvious he's a priest. He then introduces himself as Dr. Kong, saying it's a pleasure to meet him. It seems Colonel's companions have heard of Kong and are whispering about him. However, the leader commands them to be silent. Colonel apologizes for their behavior, and says they've heard of Kong and his deeds, but Kong thinks he's facing the man who humiliated a priest. Jokingly, Kong says he sees that Father Hoyes is doing well. Getting straight to the point, they ask the protagonist to show the area where the monsters are, and he accompanies them. But upon arriving at the site, everyone is horrified, as the scene is shocking. Colonel Axelo remarks that such grotesque sights are common there. Immediately, he instructs Team 1 to focus on purifying the area, Team 2 to search the entire area, and Team 3 to take the bodies back to camp. For Team 4, he asks them to incinerate the decaying corpses. Using sacred fire, they carry out the task. The protagonist watches closely as the task is performed and tells the Union representative that this is necessary to prevent them from returning to life as they did before. Then, Colonel calls him, and asks if he could take a look at the rare monster, the pack leader. Kong agrees. With that, the two approach the corpse, and Colonel notices the body is already quite decomposed. The protagonist notices the strong smell, likely due to dark magic. Colonel asks Kong for permission to take the body with them, and the doctor asks why. The cult leader explains that they're interested in studying the corpse further, in case more like it appear in the future. He also says they did not leave Kong empty-handed, and he presents him with a vial from the Church of Ivert, called Dawn's Holy Water. The representative is very surprised to hear this, and Kong asks if the item is valuable. He replies that holy water is created by placing the purest water on the altar, requiring an entire year of prayers, and a tremendous amount of effort and faith goes into it. Even when sealed in its container, it emanates divine power. Just one bottle is capable of purifying hundreds, even thousands of undead. After the explanation, he says that if Kong trades the item for the corpse, he himself will make an offer to purchase it, as that holy water is worth billions in gold. The protagonist knows the monster's relic was broken anyway, and selling the corpse wouldn't be worth more than the item. So, he agrees to make the trade, and Colonel expresses his gratitude. He speaks on behalf of the Church of Ivert, thanking the one who managed to eradicate this vile existence through great effort. Their immense and sincere thanks. The others also follow the leader in thanking him, though some believe the protagonist only did it for the money. Kong affirms that he only did what had to be done. Sincerely, he says he is the healer who wishes to end the existence of the undead. After working late into the night, the day breaks, and Kong is awakened because Barcelo says he needs to get up. The protagonist asks what is so urgent, and Barcelo says the Adventurers Guild manager is there to see him. Kong is somewhat alarmed by this and quickly gets up. Soon after, the two are face to face, and the manager says he's heard a lot about him. The manager, Lewin Herscher, states that he is very proud of Kong for defending everyone against the undead. For his part, Kong says it's an honor to receive the manager there, and Lewin says he couldn't avoid doing so after hearing the news. But the protagonist knows it's just empty talk, because he knows Lewin Herscher is an incompetent and self-serving individual who only assumed his current position because of his privileged background and lacks a good reputation. So, he can only be there for personal interests. Lewin Herscher then says that, because Kang defended the place with bravery. He prepared a great reward for him. Barcelo recognizes it as an extract of the golden vitality mushroom, and Leywenhersher asks him to explain its effects. Barcelo explains that mushrooms are ingredients for stamina potions. However, golden ones are rarer and even more sought after because they provide greater stamina. After hearing the full explanation, Kang wastes no time and drinks from the vial. He sees his stamina status increase and thanks the manager for his generosity. Leywenhersher is pleased to see him satisfied. However, the protagonist breaks the vial after drinking it all, and says the manager wasn't there just to deliver that. He also says he is incredibly tired now and doesn't want to drag this out, because he knows the manager is there for Dawn's holy water. Leywenhersher realizes Kang wants to get straight to the point, and says he has an item that can't be bought with money, so the manager would like to trade it for something else that can't be bought with money, mentioning a dimensional funnel, which shocks Kang upon hearing it. Leywenhersher asks if he's correct, and the protagonist wants to know how he knows about dimensional travelers and what his intentions are. The manager says it's a sad thing to think that dimensional travelers with special powers aren't being treated well just because their origins are unknown. Not only can they not reach higher positions even if they prove their abilities, but there are also healers who weren't approved as officials. Kang asks what his point is. Leywen says that if he hands over the holy water, he promises to issue Kang a healer's badge and grant the sponsorship of the Hersher family. The protagonist says he couldn't become a certified healer according to the rules. However, the manager says rules aren't an issue for his family. He also says Kang would have the experience of becoming a recognized healer, backed by an illustrious member of a noble family, as long as he accepts the offer. And he might even consider becoming the royal healer. In other words, entering the royal family. Dawn's holy water has that much value to make it possible. Leywen believes that, if he gets the holy water in his hands, he can move to an even bigger and better place instead of living in a small village. And turning an ordinary healer into a royal noble wouldn't be a problem. However, surprisingly, the protagonist refuses the offer. Leywen asks why he refused. Kang responds that there's no need for him to be recognized by distributing bribes, as he already has sufficient qualifications as a healer. The manager finds him very arrogant, but doesn't give up on convincing him, offering sponsorship, one that no one would think of refusing due to its value and the Hersher family name. The protagonist states that, apparently, within the manager's family, it isn't that influential, and the benefits are also unknown, so he declines the offer. Leywenhersher becomes furious, asking if the protagonist is mocking him. But Barcelo tries to calm the union manager down. After some time in this discussion, Kang finds his friend. Kim asks what happened, as some guys were going around distributing rewards. The protagonist asks what he received, and Kim shows him an item called a bloodstone, which strengthens the user's attacks. Kang recalls that, even with the manager upset, he still managed to swipe a good reward for the group members. Even though he captured the undead with his partner, he demanded the reward for the service, and Kim ended up with a very good item. However, their peace is interrupted when the camp alarm sounds, announcing that monsters are attacking from various directions, and adventurers are summoned to fight. Kang then calls his friend to join him in protecting everyone. After that, he sees a group of adventurers being attacked by enemies. Before the situation worsens, Kang, from the top of a tree, shoots an arrow. Kim doesn't hold back and uses his new item, saying it's nothing compared to what they faced before. With his stronger attacks, he easily defeats the monsters. However, the protagonist notices that one of the adventurers is in trouble, having been struck in the back by an enemy. The monster in question is a boss in the form of a bear. It's the only one still alive, and the other adventurers gather to try and defeat it together. But even giving their best, they struggle, as the enemy's strength is immense, proportional to its size. Kim realizes that arrows won't work against it. However, his friend says he expected something like this and prepared something special, an arrow crafted from mole steel. Using it, Kang strikes the bear and creates a distraction. Kim approaches in close combat and manages to wound it. He then tells his friend to seize the opportunity, and so, the protagonist advances. From above, he attempts to attack the enemy. With his active skills, he throws his knife and lands a critical hit on the monster, thus protecting the village. Afterward, their hard work is praised, and the joint attack is deemed a success. They are even recognized as the ones who stopped the undead attack. This makes Kim feel like a hero. He then says they were able to collect plenty of points, and asks if his friend will take the chance to spin the roulette. Kang hopes for a big win. However, Kim says the system won't give something good just because he's asking for it, but Kang replies that you never know. Kim says he's betting everything on his friend. After that, the protagonist spins the roulette, but he's not pleased with the items he won. Kim even says he tried to stop him. Next, they are interrupted, as Barcelo appears and wants to speak with them. He didn't want them to leave without thanking them for the immense work they did in preventing a real disaster. The protagonist says it was nothing and that he couldn't let the camp be destroyed. Barcelo states they postponed operations until the priests finish their investigations. Lastly, he offers them a reward for their service. Afterward, they head to a bar. Kim thought the best way to celebrate their achievements was to have a drink. Khan comments that he didn't think they would achieve something like this. Khan recalls Barcelo mentioning that all camp staff are from the village of Haint, and Kim says they all seem strange. Their celebration is then interrupted by someone searching for Dr. Kang Sun-yoon. The protagonist is surprised by this sudden appearance, as Ruth Jaker shows up and says that, as expected, he found the doctor there. Kim asks if his friend knows him, and Kang says he's someone who treated him before. Jaker says he received great help the last time they met, and now presents the payment he couldn't provide at the time. The doctor had even forgotten about this, but he remembers taking Jaker's sword as collateral and now returns it to its owner. Jaker is overjoyed to have his weapon back. He chats with both of them and realizes they've stayed at the camp until now, resting after completing their contracts. And he asks if, should they have some time, they would join a team, because a dungeon portal near the village of Hind has appeared. Apparently, a team said they would attempt it in 3 days, so Jaker's younger cousin asked for help to go as a group member, but he couldn't because he had to pay off a loan. Kim advises him never to borrow from the union, even if he's starving. The protagonist asks what he should do, as the reward seems tempting. His friend agrees to join. Thus, Jaker thanks them for their help and thinks he can relax a bit, knowing they'll handle the matter. In his thoughts, Khan wonders if Jaker knows how amusing it is to see someone begging him to save them. 3 days later, Kim asks if the doctor has everything ready. He replies that he does, and his wrist is fully healed as well. He also says he's ready to earn 100,000 gold coins. Kim doesn't understand at first, but soon he asks if his friend succeeded. Khan responds that he met Mr. Kayel yesterday, and Kayel cast a blessing on him, and after that, his luck changed. Afterwards, the two head to Hakart Hill, where a woman introduces herself as Tina Putian. She is a swordswoman and Jaker's cousin. The protagonist introduces himself and also his friend Kim, the tank. The rest of the group includes Rakramarty, a fighter, Sahita, the priestess, and Shuire, the mage. They are not confident in the healer chosen to assist them. The mage points at Kim and asks what kind of tank wears clothes like those. However, he says there's nothing wrong with his clothes and that they are precious in their own way. The group leader asks everyone to calm down, because they should show more respect to those who came to help them. His name is Isle, the rogue. Kim comments that Isle is much more polite than the others and asks if he's the leader. However, Rakramarty says that position is actually his. Once everything is ready, they head to the magical portal, and through magic, they are transported to the dungeon. Quickly, they arrive at the mission site, and the protagonist notices it's an ancient dungeon. The mage conjures a magical light, and lights the way for the group. While walking through it, the protagonist notices everything is deteriorated and knows this usually happens through exposure to water and air. But since they're deep in a ruin, there shouldn't be any air, and he doesn't sense any humidity either. Soon, he suspects there might be dark magic activity. Meanwhile, Kim notes that Rakramarty said he was a fighter but also uses healing, so he asks if he's some kind of physical therapist. But Rakramarty says he's a monk. Thus, those who use divine power don't react much. The protagonist notices strange movement in the area, and soon observes some dangerous insects appearing. The group's mage quickly takes action to defeat them, and with an explosion, she kills several insects at once. Kim and Tina don't stand still and begin to act as well, but the insects end up surrounding Rakramarty and Sahita. Al says it's impossible to kill all the insects, so they should focus on using their powers and retreat when possible. Next, Kang asks Shuire if she knows how to use wind magic. The mage replies that she does. The protagonist then breaks one of the potion vials from his stock, and shows the mage what she should do, asking her to spread the contents he will throw. The mage complies with the order, spreading the potion into the air. And with that, all the insects within range are affected. After they're all dead, Shuire asks how Kang knew it would work. He says it's a secret, but the mage insists on knowing. Meanwhile, Rakramarty thinks only the two of them managed to clear the area alone. Al says everyone did well and offers a bottle to each member before they continue walking through the dungeon. They thank him, and the protagonist notices the bottle contains mana. Khan knows mana potions are very expensive and asks if it's okay to offer them like this. Al says it's fine because he's a pharmacist and has easy access to mana. Thus, Khan accepts it gladly, thinking it's uncommon to find someone so generous. However, something about Al feels familiar for some yet unknown reason to the protagonist. Regardless, they continue their journey through the dungeon. Kim leads the way and notices something intriguing. There are 2 paths ahead, leading in opposite directions. The group leader isn't pleased about this at all. He notices Sahita is more uneasy than usual and asks what's wrong with her. The girl says she sensed dark magic coming from the left path. Al asks if it's a trap. However, Rakramarty says there's no time to think about it now, and they should take the right path. but the protagonist disagrees with this decision, stating that the correct thing to do is to take the path to the left. Kang insists that they must go left. The leader asks if he heard what was said earlier, that this path is filled with dark magic. Kang says he knows, and Rakramarty asks why he wants to take the most dangerous path. Because, in case he isn't aware, the moment they enter, they'll be killed. Kang must be crazy to suggest that. Kim and Tina urge the leader to calm down, and at least hear what Kang has to say, but he doesn't want to listen, as he refuses to take the path with dark magic. Rakramarty even says this is what happens when you hire an amateur. Sahita says she doesn't want to take this path, and the mage agrees with her. Soon, the group leader says that if Kang wants to take the most dangerous path, he can go alone and not take anyone to their death. Thus, the three proceed along the right path. Tina, however, stays behind and asks if Kang is okay. He replies that he is and asks why she didn't follow her group. She says that, somehow, she believes the doctor is right, as it wouldn't be for nothing that her cousin recommended him to join the group. The protagonist thanks her for placing her trust in him. But Tina wasn't the only one who stayed. I'll also stay behind, and Kang asks why. He replies that he simply decided to trust the healer's judgment. The group leader follows the path he deemed correct and feels justified, as nothing happens to them, not even a single monster appears to attack. He even wonders what's going on in the protagonist's mind. Shuire, in a way, understands why Tina didn't join them, as she was responsible for the recruitment, but he didn't expect Al to follow the healer either. In the middle of the corridor they were walking through, the leader hears a strange noise, and before they know it, they fall into a trap. The mage tries to move, but the floor starts to crumble with their movements. Sahita panics and tries to flee, but she notices cracks in the ground, and is soon struck by spikes emerging from the magical field. Rakramarty, who is also a monk, tries to heal her, but the situation of their teammate is dire. She screams in pain, and the mage asks why the leader's magic didn't work. He explains that the girl was struck by cursed spikes, and only priests can break curses like that. Meanwhile, the protagonist walks calmly, and says he warned earlier that this was the wrong path. The leader is shocked to see him. Rakramarty asks how Kang managed to get there. He replies that he anticipated such dangers and was prepared for them. Tina realizes that they've fallen into a dark magic seal. The leader notices the seal reacted to divine magic and wonders if it was designed to target priests. He also doubts Kang, and asks how he knew about this and foresaw the whole situation. The protagonist simply says that's not what's important right now. However, Rakramarty insists that he must know how to heal the priestess and got there knowing this beforehand, so he must cure her now. Kang asks why he should obey a leader who rejected the viewpoint of a group member and led others into a dangerous zone. The leader grits his teeth in frustration but realizes Sahita is writhing in pain. Swallowing his pride, he admits to Kang that he made a mistake. On his knees, he begs the doctor to help his friend, saying that without him, Sahita might die. That's exactly what the protagonist enjoys. Using his skills, he stops the bleeding, but his friend Kim asks how he intends to break the curse, knowing that Kang doesn't possess any sacred abilities. The protagonist admits this is true, but he has an item more powerful than such abilities: the purest holy water, whose potency can be felt just by holding the bottle. Just one drop of it will be enough to dispel the patient's curse. After applying the holy water to the girl, its effects begin to manifest. The group mage asks if Dr. Kang can really heal the priestess. Al, however, says he wouldn't have any difficulties, as he knows Kang is weak with divine powers but has his own unique strengths. Even so, Rakramarty is worried, as he clearly has feelings for her. Shortly after, the protagonist finishes the procedure and apologizes for the delay. Kim carries the priestess, as her leg, even though healed, still prevents her from walking on her own. Either way, the doctor did an excellent job, and all the group members are happy that she's okay. Rakramarty, reluctantly, admits he's never seen such a skilled healer before and realizes he made a big mistake. Even his companions now scold him. Al, however, is the only one who remains silent. The group proceeds to the left entrance of the dungeon fork. However, they encounter something different: a massive door, which appears to lead to a boss room. Kim comments that all the ease they had along the way will be compensated once they cross through the door, but the mage disagrees, saying it wasn't easy since they almost died. Regardless, the leader instructs everyone to stay on guard. As soon as they open the door, a sinister creature welcomes them, calling them insignificant sacrifices. A strong energy moves toward the group. Among them, Kang is the only one who doesn't flinch. Immediately, they face the boss, the ancient dungeon boss, with unknown characteristics. The leader is shocked in the presence of the enemy, and the mage warns of the dark magic energy emanating in the area. Kim says they can't turn back now, wondering if they can even defeat someone like that. The creature remarks that it's foolish of them to have come this far. It adds that they should feel honored to become sacrifices for the great being. The creature then starts boasting. telling them to listen closely to its magnificent name. However, before it can say it, it's struck by an arrow, and the rest of the group is stunned. Because, with a single shot, the monster is defeated, and it completely disintegrates. The protagonist is pleased that it worked, and praises the performance of his weapon, because he had baptized one of the arrows with holy water. Al, who watched from a distance, wonders what exactly happened. The fact that the creature died so quickly caught everyone off guard, and the mage questions how the protagonist suddenly wielded so much divine power. Even Kim asks why the doctor used his ultimate move right at the start to defeat the boss. Kang replies that people who wait to use their best move at the end are strange. After that, he retrieves the fired arrow, and with Freya's system, even the holy water was restored. The group leader fears that, now that the boss has been defeated, the entire room therein might disintegrate. Shuire says that if that happens, she can generate a circle for them to escape. However, I'll suggest they thoroughly investigate the boss room before leaving, as there's still time. He also mentions that creating such a magic circle would require a lot of mana from the mage. She agrees. The leader states that they probably already know this, but everyone is responsible for finding their own items in the boss room, and since the dungeon might disintegrate, they should search as quickly as possible. Tina notices the altar in the room, because there's a lot of blood around it, and she's intrigued by how many sacrifices the boss must have made. Kim, on the other hand, only wants to grab the items around to sell them. The protagonist observes closely and thinks there might be something underneath all that blood on the altar. So, he decides to check and finds a box. When he opens it, he is greatly surprised, because it was, in fact, a magical mechanism, which activated several dimensional portals, bringing undead into the area. Rakramarty tells everyone to prepare for battle. He takes the initiative to act, and attacks the horde with sacred fire. Kim comments that, for a physical therapist, he fights pretty well, and Rakramarty becomes quite irritated at the remark. The mage says they just need to forcefully bring them down, even if they're undead. Aiming for their heads is the most effective. With that, she casts consecutive explosions against the enemies, and the protagonist uses his crossbow to shoot from afar. He thinks the undead shouldn't have risen after the boss's death, and wonders why this happened. In any case, the group, working together, manages to eliminate all the enemies. However, Kang remembers the boss's remains. Upon checking the body, he doesn't find a core. He then asks his friend's opinion, but Kim faints shortly after. Kang prevents his friend from hitting the ground, but he realizes that not only him, but the entire group has also fainted. On one hand, he's relieved because they're not dead, just unconscious. This makes him think he must have killed a clone of the boss instead of the original. In that case, he tries another option, equipping a stamina arrow on his crossbow, because the real boss is still there. Then, he fires the arrow at the only group member who was still standing. However, that person deflects the arrows, and they hit the others instead. The protagonist apologizes for firing the arrows so suddenly, but it's okay because they were healing arrows. Al now realizes what he has done, saying he thought he was being attacked and defended himself, but luckily for the protagonist, he fell into the trap. The rogue tries to defend himself, claiming there was a misunderstanding between them, because, as Kang must know, a rogue's life is full of such situations, and he instinctively dodged the arrow, identifying it as a possible threat. However, the protagonist points out that the strangest thing is that everyone else passed out, yet he remained standing. Al says that Dr. Kang is also still standing. The protagonist responds that this might be because he was the only one who didn't drink the mana bottle that Al distributed earlier. This makes Al thoughtful. Kang says there's one more thing. He moves toward the rogue, wielding his knife, and attacks him, saying that ordinary rogues don't use weapons imbued with dark magic, unless they're the true boss of this dungeon. Al realizes his mask has fallen, and admits that the protagonist is quite perceptive. He then reveals his true appearance and identity as the priest of the forgotten god. At first, Kang thought he might be, at best, some con artist, but imagining he was the true boss seemed absurd. Either way, he now knows the truth, and Al admits he can no longer make excuses. He says no one has ever uncovered his true identity before and praises the protagonist for doing so, announcing he will sacrifice him alive, and will enjoy doing it. He then stabs his own hand, saying he's done this all along for the Great One. The protagonist wonders how many people the scumbag has killed so far. Still, the enemy doesn't give him much time to think, as he charges at him, bloodthirsty. Kang notices his movement, and defends himself from the enemy's attack. Using his crossbow, he shoots stone arrows, forcing Al Croa to dodge. Al decides to target the protagonist's weapon, saying he was handpicked by his master, who made him a special rogue. He wonders how happy his master would be if he sacrificed the protagonist in his name, just as he did with his other companions all this time, with his own hands. Kang thinks Al is completely unhinged, but is surprised by his next move, as Al opens a massive portal, telling the protagonist to rest in peace. Only now does Kong realize that the enemy was drawing a magic circle with his own blood. From this circle, a monster begins to emerge, attempting to capture the protagonist, as Al plans to offer him as a sacrifice. The protagonist is entirely surrounded by a malevolent aura, but within the circle, a strong energy emerges, even leaving Al confused. Kong manages to escape and simply remarks that Al's skills with a dagger truly reveal he is a rogue. This leaves Al quite surprised. The enemy doesn't understand how Kong escaped, and tries to trap him in the circle again to be sacrificed. But the protagonist shows no signs of fear. Al thinks this can't be the power of the great god that was bestowed. He concludes that Kong is absolutely insane. For his part, the protagonist mentions having a question about the box on the altar, and asks if that item belongs to Al. Al realizes that Kong has taken the sacred orb of the great Kirkarashtal. Kong sarcastically comments that he didn't know the artifact belonged to a deity, but then states that no power granted by a god can work against its own artifact. Al insists there should have been a powerful seal on it. A black mage's seal, after all, is still dark magic. However, Kong knows this is nothing that his powerful holy water can't break. Hearing this, Al remarks that Kong is quite bold and asks if he knows what the artifact truly is. Even if the god he serves hasn't been forgotten, they will soon resurrect. For this reason, Al takes action. He doesn't give up on killing Kong and demands that he return the stolen item. But the protagonist can only think of Al as a fanatic who can't use rogue skills, which is why he can't wield the item he stole. So if the item is truly important to Al, he should take it. Kong then throws the orb into the air. The enemy panics upon seeing this, but this is the reaction Kong was expecting. Using a lasso, he retrieves the item, having used it as a distraction, and now has Al in his sights. Unaware, the rogue has fallen into a trap and is caught off guard, but upon being hit, he becomes furious, and uses dark magic to summon some spikes. Kong notices that Al didn't cast an offensive spell but a defensive one, identifying that Al is trying to recover. However, Kong has no trouble cutting through the enemy's barrier, so he approaches the fallen rogue, and using his crossbow combined with Al's own thorns, he prepares a special arrow, aiming it directly at the enemy's face. The protagonist fires, hitting the target squarely. When struck, Al stops attacking. He starts lamenting about the orb, and the protagonist remarks that after all of this, that's the only thing he cares about, and he thinks that fanatical men have no purpose left when they fail. However, Al says that Kirkashtal had spoken, that they felt an indescribable being watching over him. In the end, Kong was someone just like him. Kong considers that they might be able to see the administrator beyond the status screen since they are technically a god. However, he says he doesn't believe in things like gods. Al claims the protagonist cannot deny that he received a transcendental power, and will also, incessantly, desire. But the doctor says that, unlike him, he is not a fanatic. He also thinks he is cooperating with the administrator by choice and would never serve them for any kind of plan or purpose that wasn't in his interest. The protagonist turns and wonders if it's not time for the others to wake up. Shortly after, the rest of the group starts waking up. Kong comments that Kim has finally woken up, and his friend asks what happened. As soon as she stands, Tina is startled, because she sees Al dead and still doesn't know what happened. The protagonist tells her not to feel sad for him because he was, in fact, the true boss of the dungeon. He also says that everyone is alive thanks to him. He recounts the entire story to the group, and it takes them a moment to process everything. But the priestess begins to notice that she had always felt a negative mana near him before. Kim asks the protagonist how he figured out Al was evil. Kong responds that, generally, people who seem excessively nice are untrustworthy. Additionally, Al was always smiling and talking politically correctly, constantly trying to appear like a good person. For a brief moment, Kim thinks this description also applies to Dr. Kong. The protagonist asks Shuire to prepare a magic circle for their departure, and to make it as large as possible. The mage says his sacred power resembles that of a high-ranking priest, and Kang's determination makes her suspect he is hiding his sacred power, but she is certain he is an inquisitor of some order. Either way, she agrees to fulfill the request. Before leaving, Kong looks at Sahida, and notices she seems a bit shaken, so he asks for some time to talk to her. He says it's no surprise that people die on the continent of Azel. However, it's somewhat dubious to leave corpses scattered around like this. Kim asks if they weren't summoned by the dungeon boss. Normally, dungeon summons are mass-produced with uniform appearances, but these corpses have unique characteristics. It's likely they were adventurers sacrificed because of Isle. In fact, Sahida also wanted to say that, as a priestess of the Order of Ivert, she couldn't simply turn a blind eye to this. The protagonist then asks if there's something he can do. She says she would like him to pray for the deceased, with a magic circle surrounding the bodies. Shuire offers a prayer for everyone to pass on and rest in peace. Kim and Tina also pray. The protagonist pretends to agree but just wants it to end quickly so the dead can have a deserved rest. Meanwhile, Sahita prays for them to rest beside the Great Ivert. Kang receives an alert from his system, because by participating in a purification and a parting ritual, he earned an achievement. When he checks, he sees the reward is called Prayer of Relaxation. His friend Kim also receives the same alert. The protagonist asks to move the bodies to the magic circle and says it would be great if they could transport all of them at once. Sahita says she will handle it. She then uses her magic and creates a mana barrier around the corpses. The mage says she is also ready. However, the protagonist notices something different. Someone has appeared behind the mage and tries to stab her in the back. Al, who had not moved until now, was simply waiting for an opportunity like this, and the girl starts bleeding from the blow she suffers. Kim says Al was dead and asks how he's now moving. There shouldn't be anyone left to use necromancy either. The protagonist, however, says there is exactly one scoundrel capable of this, the being who granted power to Al, the forgotten deity known as Kirkarashtal. He tells the rest of the group to keep moving the bodies and the mage Shuire. To the priestess, he says he wants her help to take out the trash, though she doesn't understand why she was chosen for this. The enemy doesn't care, and immediately goes on the attack. Khan, however, defends against Al's attack. While keeping his opponent distracted, he asks Sahita to help. Despite being very afraid to fight, she decides to attack Al, telling him to stay dead. He becomes furious after being hit, and in revenge tries to stab the girl, but the protagonist stops him, and tells her to keep attacking. So she does, using sacred magic against Al. The effects of this power are quite painful, to the point where he screams in agony. However, something else happens. Inside Al's body, he extracts his own essence, and declares to his master that this will be his final sacrifice, himself. The protagonist realizes that the enemy, in a desperate attempt, is trying to destroy the entire dungeon and kill everyone in it. Seeing everything about to collapse, the protagonist shouts for everyone to escape. The entire ceiling is cracking. Witnessing this, Al glorifies his master, saying it is all for him. However, he is struck by a large piece of the collapsing ceiling. Kang drags the priestess to join the others. Then, he asks the leader how Shuire is doing. He says he treated her wounds, but she has no mana left, and can no longer teleport them out. The protagonist thinks her mana may have drained because of the shock she experienced, and concludes that the enemy was intent on sacrificing them regardless. Rakramarty laments that they've lost their only way out alive. Even the mage begins to cry, unable to teleport them out of the dungeon. Khan knows that not much mana is needed to complete the teleportation process, and asks Shuire if she already finished the magic circle. She responds that she did, but still can't activate it due to her 0 mana. In that case, the protagonist states that they have no other choice. He then calls Tina, knowing she has magical knowledge to differentiate types of magic circles at a glance, as well as highly skilled control abilities that can generate mana in the form of a barrier. No matter how you look at it, she is closer to a mage than a swordswoman. Tina says she can't do much in this situation. At that moment, a part of the ceiling collapses, and narrowly misses her. Khan tells her they don't have time for hesitation, insisting that if she can help in any way, she must do it now. She admits she might make a mistake but will try anyway. With that, the protagonist feels somewhat relieved, noticing that Shuire drew a Trinity magic circle. It's a multi-person spell that requires more than 2 people to inject mana. If he were in Shuire's place, he would have used a clone spell, but that's impossible. Thus, Kang decides to help another way. With a mana bottle combined with his abilities, the protagonist injects the necessary mana into the circle, enabling it to activate. Tina also plays her part. Kang feels a bit nervous about whether it will work or not, but at the last second, the portal activates. A short time later, he wakes up on the ground. When he gets up, he realizes that everyone was teleported safely. However, he doesn't recognize where he is. He then asks the mage where they are. Shuire responds that they are west of the Azel continent, at her affiliate, the Crimson Mage's Tower. Thus, Kang deduces that this must be Kamar. Kim asks if he's referring to the wealthy district, the city below the river Kamar. It's a place located at the Crimson Mage's Tower, a safe region in the west of the continent. Thanks to the wealthy nobles and mages living there, it's easy to find good items for purchase. This is the first time the protagonist visits this place. However, he hears people approaching the door. From outside, they mention that the return coordinate has been activated and wonder who could have arrived during this time. When they open the door to the room, they find Shuire and the others, and become quite agitated. Khan asks her why they're reacting so strongly. Before she can respond, she is reprimanded by her teacher, who hits her on the head, as he is furious about her return. Shuire tries to calm him down, but he says he cannot relax, thinking about how she nearly ruined his team. Then, Tanza Loris, her teacher, asks if she escaped the ancient dungeon, saying that before she left, she declared she wouldn't be one of the boring mages of the tower and would succeed as an adventurer, yet she has returned after nearly dying. He acknowledges the protagonist, saying he did a good deed, and Kong replies that he only did what needed to be done. He praises the doctor's work while the others collect the bodies they brought. Tanza Loris also says he will provide some rooms for everyone to spend the night and rest. After some time, he and his friend Kim lie down to sleep, but for some reason, Kong can't fall asleep. So, he decides to get up and walk around. However, he encounters someone and asks what they're doing there at that time of night. Outside, it was Tina, and the protagonist asks what she's doing. She says she felt at home and happy to be in a mage tower again after so long. Kong then remarks that she was from a mage tower, just as he suspected. Tina confirms this and apologizes for what happened earlier, saying it was an urgent situation, and she panicked. However, the protagonist tells her she doesn't need to apologize and affirms that everyone survived because of her. She is grateful and relieved by his words. She explains that her origins are from the Golden Mage Tower, and since childhood, she showed talent in magic, becoming the hope of her family. However, she always preferred sword fighting and misses the times when she trained with wooden swords alongside her cousin. She admits that because of this, her magical talent diminished, though it wasn't exceptional to begin with. Kong asks if that's why she left the tower where she lived. Tina replies that it is but admits that, in the end, she didn't manage to do anything right and regrets not continuing her magic training. The protagonist notices she has intermediate potential talent, and says he doesn't know much about this since he hasn't learned any of these tricks. But above all, the important thing is doing what you truly wish to do. However, Kong asks if she feels inadequate compared to others because of her lack of talent, and says that when that happens, she just needs to use a little trick. Tina asks what the trick is, and he says it's simply to do it by any means necessary. These words open Tina's mind, even if it's considered unconventional. The next day, Kim, alongside his friend, says goodbye to the rest of the group. The protagonist notices the man eager to train and the woman determined to finish the case, the perfect ending for the disbanding of a party. He asks Tina what she plans to do from now on. Kim, on the other hand, suggests she could join them if she has nothing else planned. However, Tina says she already has her own plans for the future. She states that she intends to become a sword mage. She adds that even if people laugh, saying it's a role that's either one thing nor the other, it's truly what she wants to do. But Kong says he suspected she would choose that path. He also tells her that if she's truly decided, she should go to a certain place, handing her a letter with the address. Tina sees that it's for the village of Legend Faroe, the coldest place in the northern region. The protagonist confirms this and says there's a powerful sword mage there she should meet, someone exactly suited to help her. Since her skills are at least promising, just seeing things with her own eyes will be beneficial. With this, Tina is deeply grateful, and so, she says goodbye to the protagonist. Kim says they should take the opportunity to leave as well. However, Shuire appears and asks them to wait a moment. After some time, they head to Professor Tanza Loris' office, where he apologizes for delaying their departure. The protagonist says it's fine, and asks who the person beside him is. He introduces himself as Shizong, a professor of dark magic, and says it's a pleasure to meet them. From the Black Mage Tower, also known as the Tower of Dark Mages, their primary research is how to properly use dark magic and dark mana. The protagonist knows that as long as it's authorized, dark magic is partially legal. Shizong is extremely excited to meet the protagonist, and the professor explains that he became this way after hearing what happened in the dungeons. He asks Kong if there's any item from the enemy he used among his loot because he'd really like to purchase it for research purposes. Kong knows he obtained the secret orb of Kirkarashtal but wants to keep that a secret for now. He then tries to recall if there was anything else he took, and remembers that Al carried a rogue's dagger, which Kong definitely kept for himself. He thinks this item might satisfy Shizong's curiosity, so he presents the magical dagger used by the enemy. Shizong says he feels a strong source of dark magic coming from the object and would be delighted to acquire it. Then, he displays all the items he had with him, and says that Kong can choose anything he wants in exchange for the dagger. But the doctor looks at the items and thinks that only a mage would be interested in them. However, one of the items Shizong threw on the table catches the protagonist's attention. He picks up the object in his hand and asks what it is. As he turns the item's mechanism, he realizes it's just a toy that plays music. An awkward atmosphere quickly fills the room, and Shizong explains that it's called an energetic music box, feeling very embarrassed about the situation. However, Kong notices that the item absorbs all the mana in the environment and converts it into vitality. He even starts to feel his stamina regenerating. So, he says he will accept the exchange of the dagger for all the mage items. Now that he has plenty of books and scrolls, Kim mentions that his friend could earn a lot by selling them. However, Kang decides to check the contents first, and discovers that one of the scrolls contains instructions on how to make ice potions. With this, he can just buy the ingredients and make them instead of purchasing them ready-made. The protagonist then tells Kim he would like to stay a bit longer at the Mage's Tower. His friend asks if that's possible. He replies that it is because Professor Tanzel Loris gave him permission, saying it was his way of thanking Kang for saving his student, even inviting them to a full tour of the place. Kim says his prejudices are completely disappearing. So, he agrees to stay and mentions he's heard there are many exclusive items for sale here, like magical equipment, and the potions are also of superior quality. Shortly after, they head to the tower's potion shop. There, the protagonist wants to buy 3 boxes of stamina potions. After placing his order, he notices a man preparing something in a cauldron, and apologizes for interrupting, but advises him not to add that herb as an ingredient. The man looks at the protagonist and immediately identifies that he can't use mana, and completely ignores what Kang told him, adding the herb to the cauldron without hesitation. Seeing this, Kim remarks that his prejudices are coming back, and his friend simply suggests they leave as quickly as possible. They do so, leaving the shop shortly afterward. Kim asks why the protagonist told the man not to use that ingredient. Before answering, they hear a loud explosion coming from the shop, and the protagonist explains that's why he warned the man against using the herb. Hearing the explosion, Kim is terrified by the noise, but the protagonist runs toward the shop and enters quickly. Inside, the cauldron is bubbling violently, though it shouldn't be, and everyone is worried, with some not even understanding why this happened. The man preparing the potion doesn't understand what went wrong either, but one of his companions explains that this caused a kind of poisonous cloud, and tells him to create a magical shield for protection. He does so, generating a force field around himself. But as he approaches the overheated cauldron, he realizes the shield is melting as if it were nothing, and panics as the heat melts his force field. In fear, he admits he can't handle the situation, and shouts for everyone to leave the shop immediately. However, Kang arrives just in time, asking where he thinks he's going, blocking him and the others from leaving the shop, saying no one can step outside as it's too risky. He adds that he knew this could happen, which is why he previously warned against making that mixture. The man remembers the protagonist but asks why he's preventing everyone from leaving. Khan explains that the fragrant herb isn't poisonous, so they don't need to fear being poisoned. Moreover, the smoke from the explosion isn't dangerous. They ask if that means they're safe. The protagonist confirms this but adds one caveat. When they inhale the smoke, all the mana in their bodies dissolves. They panic at this revelation, but soon they begin to feel the effects, exactly as the protagonist described, with them expelling the dissolved mana from their bodies. Chaos fills their minds, and some even believe they'll never be able to use magic again, attempting once more to flee the shop. Seeing their fear-driven panic, Khan orders them to stop trying to leave immediately. He fires a warning shot with his crossbow, and reminds them where they are, stating that they're right in the middle of the Crimson Mage's Tower. So, he asks what they think will happen when they go through the door. The Mage Tower is an institution built for mages to research magic and increase their strength. In other words, this place is full of all sorts of magical research and mana-powered facilities. They now understand that if they open the door and the smoke spreads, the entire tower could easily be ruined. Kong says that even if you are poisoned with perfumed herb, there's a way to recover quickly, as long as you have the cure at the right time. Of course, he knows how to do it. They feel relieved and urge the protagonist to act quickly and fix the situation. But Kong explains that removing the smoke is more urgent than curing them, since it's not like they'll die just because they can't use mana anymore. However, for some mages who still have mana, losing it feels almost like dying. Yet Kong doesn't care about that. The desperation is especially visible in the man who caused the explosion. He kneels and begs the protagonist to do something for them, even offering to inhale all the smoke if necessary. That's exactly what the protagonist wanted, as he enjoys seeing others beg for his help. Kim asks if they should really inhale all the smoke to remove it, but the doctor says that, although he finds the idea entertaining, there's no time for that. He adds that luckily, this place is also a potion shop and has what he needs, and he tells them to bring him all the ingredients he requests from now on. With a list in hand, they begin the tasks assigned by Kong. The doctor takes a powerful silica brought by one of them. Together with the root of dry sand vine, he prepares the mixture. The protagonist knows this smoke has to be dealt with inside the shop, but since it can't be physically grabbed, it's hard to remove. So, he just needs to transform the smoke into something tangible and easy to handle. His friend Kim starts feeling the effects of the smoke, and even though Kim has little mana, the protagonist realizes he needs to act quickly. Soon, he pours the potion he prepared into a vial, because he thinks his buddy Kim can't become useless in upcoming battles. Using the potion combined with his spraying abilities, the protagonist sprays the mixture into the air, and through droplets, the smoke disperses and falls to the ground. Kim gets hit on the head by one of the gel-like spheres. The protagonist explains that the potion transformed the smoke into gel spheres. He then asks why the others haven't started gathering the spheres yet. They comply, but they notice the spheres have a somewhat unpleasant texture. However, one of them remarks that they shouldn't complain and should just do what the healer said. Because, besides clearing the smoke, he's also able to heal people. After clearing the smoke, Khan notices the mess left in the shop, and the man responsible for the explosion apologizes. However, the protagonist says he should apologize to the shop owner, not to him. Moreover, he should be the one to clean up the place. The man mentions that the doctor referred to perfumed herb earlier, but he's certain he used a seaside herb. Khan explains that perfumed herb refers to water's edge herb altered by excess mana. Normally, it's an herb used to blend medicinal ingredients, but when it becomes a perfumed herb, it dissolves mana. Hearing this, the man finds it strange that something so dangerous is cultivated in the Mage Tower. Khan didn't know this, he confirms, saying most ingredients come from the herb cultivation room of the Mage Towers. Khan asks if the usual cultivation environment could have changed. The man replies that it's probably not the case since the cultivation room is managed by a mana-powered system. This prompts the doctor to ask for more details. Then, the protagonist suddenly runs off, and Kim asks where his friend is rushing to. Khan says they urgently need to find Professor Tanzel Loris, because the situation might be far worse than he initially thought. Professor Tanzel Loris mentions that he's heard about the commotion in the potion shop. He would very much like to go there himself, but he can't move because of a meeting. Thus, he authorizes the protagonist and the others to enter the cultivation room. Shuire expresses her gratitude for this. Khan says it's a relief to find Shuire on the way to the cultivation room, and she says she was actually looking for him to give him a tour of the Mage Tower. After running for a bit, they reach the place. But what they find is far from pleasant, because the entire environment of the cultivation room, it doesn't seem safe for the protagonist at all. Nevertheless, with his crossbow, he fires an arrow that summons a moisture control magic circle. After that, he summons another magic circle, this one for temperature control, because all the support magic circles in the area were broken. The mage notices that the mana on one side of the room is strangely higher and suspects this might be causing the problem with the main magic circle. And, judging by the structure, it must be coming from within. However, something approaches the protagonist, and he quickly senses the incoming threat. He pulls Kim to prevent him from being hit, as if he hadn't done so, both could have been harmed. Kim complains a little about the rough pull, but his friend says he couldn't risk not acting. The protagonist also notices that the monster attacking them is a mana-devouring creature, a carnivorous plant known as Hera Martin. Shuire tries using wind magic against the creature, cutting it from different directions. This enrages the plant after being struck, and it attempts to retaliate. However, to defend Shuire, Kim charges forward, and protects her from being struck by the enemy. With his attack, he manages to cut one of its roots. Seeing this, Shuire says it's easier than she thought, but to everyone's surprise, the plant regenerates, and reattaches the severed root to the rest of its body. It then attacks both of them. Realizing the enemy's ability to regenerate, Khan prepares a special arrow for the situation, and fires it at the carnivorous plant. But it regenerates again, surprising the others. However, contrary to what they imagine, Khan states that this time it was different, as the regeneration was slower than when Shuire attacked. The mage asks if this is because she used mana to attack. The protagonist confirms it, explaining that since he attacked with a physical arrow, the regeneration was slower. This relates to what the plant feeds on, as mana is its fuel. Therefore, they cannot attack with magic. Kim immediately tries another approach, attacking with fire, although it seems to have some effect on the enemy. Shuire points out that burning the plant won't work either. Kim remarks that they can't properly attack the creature because it is completely filled with hatred, and suggests retreating for now, as the room is saturated with mana, feeding the creature. However, the protagonist asks why they should retreat when he can remove all the mana from the area himself. Kim doesn't quite understand how he plans to do that, but Khan uses the orbs he collected at the shop as ammunition and fires them at the creature to drain its mana. The plant doesn't take kindly to being attacked, and retaliates by releasing the same toxic smoke from before. Kim realizes that now they won't be able to use mana either. The protagonist, however, is not worried at all, saying they only need to rely on melee attacks to defeat the creature. He then grabs his trusty dagger, and makes several cuts on the plant. Afterward, he notices its regeneration effect is slowing more and more, and tells Kim to focus on attacking the plant's roots. Kim follows his friend's instructions, but the plant realizes what Kim is doing and becomes enraged. With a sword in hand, Kim prepares to defend himself, declaring that the only person unconcerned about their mana melting away will deliver his strongest blow to the carnivorous plant. Then, Dr. Kong also advances. From above, he plans to strike the plant by surprise. With his dagger, he charges forward, ready to land a precise, surgical strike thanks to his active skill, and after attacking, he succeeds. With just one well-aimed blow, he defeats the plant. He then asks Shuire to walk over to the magic circle. When they arrive, Khan observes that the circle is completely collapsed and asks what to do. The mage explains that it looks like mana beyond its limit was injected, and the circle couldn't handle it, causing mana reflux on top of that. At this rate, the accumulated mana will explode. Facing the broken portal, Kim panics, thinking it's going to shatter any moment. The protagonist asks Shuire if there's any way to stop the explosion, but she responds that there isn't, as she's a low-rank mage and doesn't have the necessary connection to perform such a feat. She adds that any wrong move could trigger an instant explosion. Kim suggests they flee as quickly as possible, but the mage says it doesn't matter, because if the spell is strong, its destructive capabilities will be immense. Not only will they be affected, but people outside as well. Khan activates his observing eyes, determined to find the mana connection circuit no matter what. So, he observes the portal closely, and manages to find what he was looking for. His companions are astonished by his actions, because the protagonist walks toward the portal. His friend insists he shouldn't do that, but, ignoring their opinions, he advances, thinking this is a massive reservoir of pure mana that has turned into a giant bomb. Soon, normal attacks won't work, but he has the perfect item, capable of storing a large amount of mana. However, time is against him, because the portal is breaking apart, and mana is overflowing, hitting the protagonist. The others are worried about him, and the mage can't even bear to look at the situation. Khan thinks he must aim at the circuit's connection point, so, he grabs the orb of the forgotten deity Kirkarashtal, and throws it toward the portal using his precision skill. He knew he had only one chance, and with a single throw, the protagonist hits the target perfectly, and realizes that the mana circuit is blocked, because the orb absorbed all the mana and then fell to the ground. Shuire decides to check what happened and is confused, because she notices the portal is no longer unstable. She doesn't understand how this was possible, but then she sees Dr. Kong smiling at her. Afterward, Kim says his friend is the best doctor. He and the mage hug the protagonist in gratitude. The protagonist, in turn, only thinks it was a good idea to test the orb's abilities beforehand. The professor appears and says he is certain there's a problem with the energy system. Shuire states that even the mage towers wouldn't withstand it if such accidents continued, and if the tower fell, the protective barriers safeguarding the city would disintegrate. Therefore, she asks the professor to investigate the mana center in the tower. Tanza Loris explains that the tower's mana center is essential to its origin and operation, but it's beyond his authority. Kim remarks that if even the professor can't go there, it will be difficult for them too. The protagonist suggests they should go directly to the administration. The professor recommends one of the tower's vice masters, a man named Mr. Heave, who might be of help. Thus, the group goes to him, and Heave asks the reason for their visit. Khan spends some time explaining the entire situation in detail. Soon, the Vice Master understands they want authorization to access the tower's mana center. Honestly, the protagonist thinks he hadn't planned to go there, but the Master will likely handle it himself if everything is explained to him. So, Khan insists that he doesn't need to go to the site. However, he says all of this is ridiculous. He claims the mana center facilities were built using the best technologies from the Crimson Mage Tower and are secure even if the Mage Tower collapses. And he asks Khan what kind of problems a place like that could possibly have. Khan, however, only thinks the Vice Master is talking nonsense because he doesn't understand the real danger around him. Hearing this prompts Shuire to ask if he has any idea of the state the cultivation room was in. Even Kim gets upset, stating they had to deal with a very challenging situation there, because the magic circle was collapsing. However, he refuses to listen any further, saying that Shuire not only fled before but is now trying to mock the tower that sheltered her, and declares they will never access the mana center. However, the protagonist, with all the patience in the world, gives him some advice, and says that evacuating people and acting now would also be the best course of action for him. The Vice Master, however, says he won't waste more time with them, and immediately expels them from his office. Outside, the mage is indignant that the Master wouldn't listen to them, and Kim is equally angry. Khan, however, hears strange noises coming from inside the office. But at this point, Shuire doesn't care, as she is furious. The protagonist thinks this man isn't really important, because immediately afterward, he uses his observer's eye skill. He has a sense of what might happen in the future. Vice Master Heave is frustrated, wondering what those bastards might have done earlier. How much could they have discovered, and whether they figured out that the mana-powered system is broken. As he prepares for the upcoming Master Delegation ceremony, he has been negligent in managing the mana center. If this fact becomes known, he knows he'll be expelled from the candidacy for mastership and thinks he must hide this until the delegation ceremony. After successfully becoming the master, he only needs to quietly clean everything up. However, Master Heave notices something unusual and wonders what it is, but by the time he realizes it, it's already too late, because the mana invaded his room and caused a massive explosion. He definitely didn't expect that. Trying to leave the place, he realizes he's trapped and can't move. He attempts to use his powers to escape, but the abundant energy in the area strikes him, causing significant damage. Soon, the Vice Master realizes the mana reflux is hitting his body. His only option is to cry out for help, and he does so, calling for someone to assist him. However, someone appears and says that he has finally understood. He recognizes the voice. Moments later, the protagonist appears and says he warned him. Still stuck to the ground, Heave admits Kong was right and apologizes. Afterward, he pleads for the protagonist to save him quickly, but Kong asks why he didn't listen to him before. Kong considers that the energy system of the Mage's Tower is currently expelling mana indiscriminately, and assumes that every area connected to the circuit is the same. Heave didn't even act as though he was listening when warned, but now he's pleading for help as he's about to die. While lying there, he begs to be saved, but the protagonist says he's too busy to spend all his time there. However, perhaps, if the Master could offer something worthwhile in exchange for help, Kong might reconsider. The Vice Master begs the Doctor not to leave, claiming he has something that might interest him. He then reveals the Mana Center's key and says he'll give it to Kong in exchange for being rescued, stating that Kong will be able to save others by controlling the disturbance in the center. The protagonist asks if Heave is now taking the lives of others as hostages. Heave simply tells him to think carefully. Kong reflects that someone like this is a potential candidate for a master? He remarks that the Crimson Mage's Tower has gone mad and recalls something they didn't tell him. He states that the entrance to the Mana Center's room was completely destroyed by the explosion. Therefore, he doesn't need the key to enter, and he bids farewell to the Vice Master. Heave, however, insists he wait, claiming he can offer something far more incredible as a reward for saving him. Kong, however, says he'll return later to deal with it. Desperate, the Master pleads with the protagonist not to leave and save him, but Kong says he will only do so after saving everyone else first. After leaving, the situation in the room worsens. Later, the Doctor thinks that this side is more or less taken care of, and that he must leave to assess the situation elsewhere. Then, he hears the sound of crying. Following the sound, he encounters some children. He approaches and asks what's going on. A girl says one of their friends is trapped under the debris. Desperate, she breaks down in tears. Kong realizes he won't be able to communicate with the girl in her current state, so he concludes he'll need to use his calming voice ability. With it, he can soothe her to gather more information. The prayer ability, if he remembers correctly, requires sacred power. With the skill activated, the Doctor gently asks the children to relax and calmly explain the situation again. Afterward, he faces the blocked door. The girl explains that the three of them were doing their lessons there, but the wall and floor exploded. They managed to escape because Lich used a magic shield, but when the bookshelf fell as they fled, it became impossible to get out. After entering, Kong finds the child, and asks if he arrived too late. Lich sees the Doctor and asks who he is. Kong says he's there to help. Lich notices the Doctor isn't wearing a mage's robe and concludes he must be an adventurer. Lich adds that there's no hope left, and asks the Doctor to take his friends and leave. This makes Kong wonder, why is this child so mature? With his observing eyes, the protagonist sees that the child is very weak and, even so, is trying to save her friends instead of herself. A stark contrast to someone who was falling apart moments ago. She insists that the Doctor not do this, as it's unnecessary, because if he touches her, the mana reflux might hit him. But Kong doesn't care and continues removing the debris. The child starts to lose consciousness, blaming herself for the situation. However, the protagonist uses his ability to prevent her from fainting but admits he can't do anything about the pain for now. She asks how he's able to use magic while being affected by the mana reflux. Kong simply replies that it's because he's an unlicensed healer and thinks he can't let a talent like hers die. After improvising a bandage for his leg, Kong holds the child and runs out of the room that is about to explode. Lich tells the Doctor to be careful, as the explosives seem quite powerful. The protagonist, in turn, asks her to stay low to avoid being hit. He knows he's on the 12th floor and needs to descend to the 9th, but upon reaching the stairs he is surprised, because they are completely destroyed. Quickly, he tries to think of an escape alternative. Soon, he spots a hole in the wall and asks Lich if she's afraid of heights. She asks the Doctor if this is really the only way. However, Kong says she doesn't need to be afraid and just needs to keep her eyes closed, because he will definitely save her. On the verge of jumping, Kong tells her to get ready because they are about to leap. Before being hit by the mana flow, Kong jumps with the girl holding onto him. The fall is far from short. Lich keeps her eyes closed as the Doctor advised, and the protagonist thinks that a normal child would have fainted in a situation like this. He also thinks that if someone like her were to die, the future of the Azel continent would be incredibly grim. Using his bow, he fires an arrow with a rope tied to it, hitting the top of the tower. However, the fabric he tied doesn't seem very sturdy, Soon Kong hopes the cloth holds, because a poor hook he made by bending a metal skewer, and a makeshift hook rope made with bandages, is not withstanding the weight of the two. This makes him think that lately, he's only been doing crazy things in his life. Down below, several people are in shock, and some try to reassure each other by saying the tower will hold. One of them thanks the protagonist for saving the children. Kong, in turn, says he only did the basics, putting a bandage on Lij's leg. The girl asks if the protagonist will now fix the mana center. He replies that he will and that he wants to save as many people as possible. Then, she offers an item, saying she doesn't know if it will help much since it was made for a specific task, but the protagonist really likes what he reads. Meanwhile, Lich sees her friends Taris and Lucy and is happy to reunite with them. Lucy asks if she's okay and if her leg is hurting. She says yes because the master healer saved her. Her friends cry and lament what happened, but she assures them it's okay and asks them not to cry, because she says seeing her friends cry makes her feel sad and cry too. The protagonist sees this and says that, despite being mature, Lich is still a child. Now, he thinks he must head to the mana center again. At the site, both the mage Shuire and his friend Kim are down. The place is completely messy and destroyed. Kong arrives and wonders what is happening and if this is the mana-powered system. The mana circuit is attached to them. Kim and Shuire were all deceived. Tanza Loris is also down and begs the protagonist not to go down this path. He states that his mana was absorbed in an instant. This isn't something one can deal with. Soon, he tells Kong to flee immediately. However, Kong says it's okay, even if the mana flow hits him. The doctor claims it won't work against him. With his bow, he prepares a special arrow and fires it at the room's core. However, the protagonist notices that by doing so, the core generates a force field to protect itself. Even the professor is surprised that the core is defending itself. Kong says this thing is becoming a real monster. Even his system alerts him of the danger. Being that the case, the protagonist tries another strategy. Then, he shoots gel orbs with the bow, the same ones from before, made by absorbing the smoke. With that, the shield protecting the core begins to melt. Soon, Kong thinks that if he can melt the core, he might discover something. However, the professor draws the protagonist's attention. He then realizes that the core is smarter than he thought, because it managed to absorb the mana that was melted. Not only that, but it seems like it's ready to retaliate, making Kong fear a sudden attack, which, subsequently, actually happens. After suffering an attack from the core, Kong takes damage to his arm. Upon seeing this, the professor asks if he's okay. He replies that he's not dead yet, because his entire body would have been torn apart if not for the sacred orb. But that doesn't matter now, because there will be no end to this if it continues to reabsorb mana like that. The core is using the absorbed mana residue as its physical body. Tanza Loris says the fragrant herb won't work against the already melted mana. Kong comments that this is probably the case, and that it was within expectations. The core then attacks, firing mana shots. One of them ends up hitting the protagonist, but it doesn't cause much damage to him, as his orb absorbs the mana. Then he finds an opening and fires at the core, but the enemy counterattacks. The projectiles collide in the air, causing explosions. Soon, the core's mana starts melting again. The professor thinks that the melted mana shots will be absorbed back into the circuit, which means they'll only end up strengthening the crystal's physical body. Because of this, he wonders what the healer is trying to do. The protagonist knows that the mana residues are the mass that forms the system's power body. This can only mean one thing. It also works in an attack. Soon, Kong springs into action. With the orb of the forgotten deity, he attacks the core, attempting to absorb all the mana. Tanza Loris is shocked to see the doctor attacking the core with his fists, but Kong is not using just his hands, as he has the orb aiding him. And with that, he says it will be the end of the core, as the mana is melting. But something catches him by surprise. The core creates 2 mana hands and tries to attack him. Kong manages to escape, and the professor is quite surprised by the core's reaction. The doctor can only think about how such a monster emerged in a mage's tower, as, aside from appearing intelligent, the core also behaves aggressively. Tanza Loris fears what might happen. The protagonist thinks the enemy is trying to completely prevent him from approaching, and that he only needs to attack it a little more. There must be a way to create an opening. Then he remembers Lich, and the scroll she gave him. This gives him an idea, because what he's facing is a mana monster. Soon, he creates Freya's destined pouch, generating a large mana potion arrow. Thinking the core won't be able to ignore this, the monster was about to attack him, when Kong fires, hitting the wall beside the enemy. Then he tears a piece of paper, which seems to be combined with the arrows. The effects begin to take hold, and the mana around the core starts melting. With this, Kong thinks it worked well, as he used the mana contamination scroll from Liji's brand. Now, with the core's defensive barrier broken, the protagonist fires. Without a shield, the core is struck, and explodes shortly after the shot. Thus, the doctor says it's finally over. In a speech, the tower leader says that, on this day, they faced a great crisis due to the failure of the mana-powered system. To the healer Kong, who saved the Crimson Mage Tower and Kamar, he, Master Lokare, expresses his gratitude as a representative, and says that whatever the protagonist needs he may ask. Since he said this, Kong would like to have the mental rest circle magic carpet specially produced by the Mage Tower. The item is something even the highest-ranking mages cannot receive without an achievement. This item is a memorial object provided only to tower members. The leader says that, even though Kong has achieved a great feat, he cannot grant it to an outsider. So, the doctor thinks this won't work. But with the authority of the Crimson Mage Tower Master, he grants healer Kong the title of honorary member of the Crimson Mage Tower. Even so, although he does not follow the path of magic, he still fought to save the Crimson Mage Tower without regard for his life. He states that if they don't accept someone like him as a member, who else would help them in the future? The protagonist reflects on being an honorary member. He would not only be a smuggler healer who cannot use healing but now a smuggler mage who cannot use magic. Then he thanks Master Lokare and accepts the invitation, although he thinks that the most important thing is helping people. At the end of the battle, Kim feels tired, saying they even gave his friend a personal room in the Mage Tower and thinks being an honorary member is pretty cool. Kong says yes, the only downside is that he still doesn't have furniture, but he'll use the place as storage anyway. So, he plans to organize his stock in the morning before heading out. After that, he opens the status window and thinks he should clean that up too. The system mentions that he has an unclaimed achievement reward, and Kong realizes he earned many accumulated points after treating the injured. He then notices he has 5,000 in used points. He remembers Ao's last words but thinks nothing good will come from being deeply tied to bastards like gods. He also thinks he must avoid direct negotiations until he gets more information about the administrator. Setting that aside, he checks the achievements from the last battle, and then examines the item slot, because the system alerts him that he can use the item slot in the status screen, allowing him to equip an item to gain its effects without physically having it on him. This will be perfect for registering the brooch and the sacred orb. But he also notices he earned an achievement for joining the Mage's Tower. He becomes intrigued about what to do. Kim tells the doctor that he grabbed the Mage Tower's cloak a minute ago and asks if he won't wear it. Kong replies that he won't because he won't look like a healer wearing something like that, stating that doctors should wear white robes. However, he then uses the Crimson Emblem skill. With it, he wonders if the emblem and skill make him a real member of the tower. His system integrates the Mage Tower's skills alongside the others, and Kong thinks this is the solution. After some time, Kong decorates and places his items in the room. He summons all his items through the system. Kim does the same with his items. Then, he asks why the doctor is like this. Because he said he was dragged to Azel while watching TV in his pajamas. Kong says he was pouring hot water into his noodles and, when he opened his eyes, he was in the cave. The protagonist says his friend is better off than him, as he didn't bring anything from his home. But Kim actually has the most useless of items. However, Kim insists that a dolphin pillow is useful because whenever he slept on the cold ground or dirt, it was a precious companion that kept him company. Then, he asks if the doctor wants to borrow it, but Kong declines, saying it smells like fish. Nevertheless, Kim defends his dolphin, saying that's not true. Meanwhile, the protagonist looks at a picture frame, and thinks he should leave it there as a keepsake. After that, they set out on a new journey, with Shuire and Li Jie bidding them farewell, saying the entire tower is indebted to them. Afterward, our heroes depart. Upon leaving, they notice they are in Karma. Kim comments that it's certainly a big city compared to a rural corner. It's a place where rich people live, so they could hire a carriage right away. But when they arrive, the attendant says he can't transport them at the moment. Kim feels disappointed and asks if they'll have to board a ship now. The protagonist asks if there's an issue at the stables. The attendant replies that there isn't, but before explaining further, Khan hears other people with the same issue. A couple demands that the bridge passage be cleared so they can get to Karen City and want to use a carriage. The guards say the barrier disappeared due to a problem in the Mage's Tower. Leaving Karma now is dangerous. However, the man insists they stop making excuses and set up the bridge immediately. The woman, who is also a mage, says she can't wait any longer, and if they won't do it, she will summon an ice road herself. Seeing this leaves the guards stunned. Even Kim draws his friend's attention to it. In the water, something begins to emerge, because the mage tried to create an alternative ice bridge. However, what none of them expected happens. Aquatic creatures start surfacing from the water. The man accompanying the mage says those are Fitz fishmen and runs away. The guards prepare for battle as the entire city comes under attack. The creatures begin advancing on them, and the guards try to hold their positions. The creatures ferociously attack anyone they see in their path. But suddenly, an arrow is fired, striking one of them directly and saving a guard. Then, the protagonist charges toward the enemies. With his bow, he aims at them, and fires new shots at the fishmen. He tells Kim they need to stop them because more are approaching. Kim uses his vampiric boost ability and joins the attack. Thus, he ends up striking the water, causing an explosion and killing some of the enemies. Soon, he says they managed to handle it quickly. However, the protagonist says that the real problem starts now. The guards regroup, with some of them injured and covered in monster blood. Meanwhile, one of them starts feeling something unusual in one of his wounds. Apparently, it's not an ordinary wound but an infection that is transforming him into something else. Kim notices this and understands what the doctor is talking about. The guard starts screaming in desperation. Soon, the others realize he is transforming into a fishman. The doctor knows that the disease caused by fishmen transforms the target's body, and humans who turn into fishmen infect other humans to proliferate. They try to apply first aid on the spot, but Kong states that curing them now won't work, because if the enemy's poison isn't removed from the infected bodies, it won't make any difference. One of the guards recognizes him as someone who helped defeat the monsters. He asks if they'll have to cut off the wounded guard's arm. The protagonist replies that the disease spreads quickly, and cutting the injured limb won't stop it. The injured man becomes hopeless, thinking there's no solution to his problem, and that he will now become a monster too. He says that if there's no way to solve the problem, he wants to die as a human, but his friends tell him not to do it. However, he tries to kill himself anyway, but the protagonist stops him, saying he's being hasty, affirming that there isn't a quick solution but never said he couldn't cure him. He says that even if a cure doesn't exist, he can create one. Then, Dr. Kong jumps into the water. The others don't quite understand what he's trying to do, but he knows that the key to curing the fishman disease is capturing one alive because if you kill one out of the water, it rots immediately. So, it is underwater that Kong needs to go to capture one. Before diving, he used a wind potion to hold his breath longer and stay submerged. Not only that, but he also relies on his skills, not to mention the more than 6,000 accumulated points he has to use. Before diving, he knew his skills weren't very effective in aquatic combat, so he decided to use those points to spin the system's roulette to obtain something useful for this mission, and he wouldn't settle until he got something he liked. The doctor wanted to delay this as much as possible, but he had no choice now that it's come to this. As he descends, he is almost hit by a water cannon, and realizes they were all gathered, practically waiting for him. But he thinks he's too lazy to advance alone, so he decides to attack from a distance with his crossbow, using a harpoon shooting skill. He says the enemy should come to him instead. With a precise harpoon shot, he manages to capture one of the fishmen. However, in doing so, he angers the others, who try to advance toward him. The protagonist, noticing this, fires in the direction of the monsters. As a result, they had no chance to retaliate, and were killed immediately in their own territory. Kong thinks that was pretty easy and didn't even have to use his new Black Star skill he obtained. But he wonders if something isn't strange. Aren't there too many of them? However, what the doctor didn't expect was for a giant fish man to appear behind him. He gets a huge fright when he sees the monster, realizing it's a rare fits the fish man. The enemy is furious over the death of his companions. With a trident, he tries to hit Kong, but Kong, though struggling, manages to dodge. However, the fishman he had captured alive is struck, and with the blow, ends up dead. At that moment, the protagonist begins to think the invasion was coordinated by the fishman's superior. In any case, he doesn't have much time to dwell on this now, as his oxygen is running out. The enemy doesn't want to waste time either. Somehow, it uses the water, turning it into ammunition, and shoots a water cannon from its mouth, the same as before. For now, the fishman leader is only using water cannons and shockwaves. All are difficult abilities but possible to dodge. Kong, however, starts thinking the monster is deliberately stalling, as it must have noticed his oxygen will run out soon. If that's the case, then the protagonist also has a solution. With a luminous arrow, he attacks. However, this only makes the monster even angrier. The enemy apparently dodges the doctor's shot, but that's exactly what Kong wanted. The arrow, even grazing the monster, hit its target. The protagonist's system alerts him that the healing arrow he fired has been damaged. The monster, initially confused, doesn't understand what happened, but as it starts to feel pain, it begins to realize that the protagonist poisoned the arrow with a potion. Kong notices it worked, as it's practically written on the enemy's face. He knows the failed cure made from the fishman's rotten liver won't be enough to kill it, but it will hurt a lot when it strikes the enemy. The monster becomes enraged, but the protagonist has just completed a task assigned by the system and unlocks the new skill he had been waiting for. He then fires more shots at the fishman leader. This time, the attacks deal much more damage than they did before. With the harpoon arrow, Kong just wants the leader to hand over his artifact and leave. Outside, in front of Kamar Lake at the north gate, Kim waits for his friend and comments that he's been underwater for a long time. He starts worrying that something might have happened, but soon after, the protagonist emerges, and they ask if he's okay. He then steps out of the water, and simply says that he must live on land as long as he remains human. The guard's arm, previously covered in scales, is now healing, thanks to the potion the doctor prepared. Happy to truly be recovering, the guard says he wants to reward the protagonist somehow. Kang replies that he doesn't care about rewards and simply tells the guard to get better soon to protect Kamar properly. Then, another guard catches the captain's attention, reporting an emergency, as the city's east and west gates have also come under attack by fishmen. In Kamar City's medical center, some of the injured are transforming into fishmen. Kang bursts in through the door. With his crossbow, he has a healing arrow ready, and with it, Kang fires at the injured. They begin reverting to their normal state. However, his friend Kim notices that it's too late for some. The protagonist realizes there's nothing he can do for those who have fully transformed. As a result, some enemies remain free to act. One even throws a hospital bed toward the heroes. However, they dodge it and move into attack. Kim asks the monster where it thinks it's going, but cornered, the fishman becomes enraged, and ends up biting Kim's sword, breaking it with its teeth. Khan fires a harpoon arrow at the monster, because he realizes his friend is in trouble. The fishmen swarm the protagonist. Thus, Kim charges in to help him, as he acts as a tank. But while fighting one of the monsters, he gets hit. The doctor becomes concerned for his friend, as he's now been bitten and could transform into one of them too. To prevent this, Kang prepares a special arrow, and fires it at the monster, which dies after being struck directly. Afterward, Kim wonders why his sword broke so easily. His friend responds that it's because he underestimated the enemies. By the way, Kim mentions the cure, and asks if Kang will be okay after being injured by one of the fishmen. Kang says he will, but before explaining further, their conversation is interrupted as the guards arrive at the scene. The protagonist informs them that he managed to apply the cure to some but couldn't save those who had fully transformed. He then laments this fact. However, the guard captain tells him he prevented the number of victims from being even higher and thanks the doctor for his help. Kang replies that it was nothing. Kang says that regarding the reward, the guard captain can decide what's best. However, their negotiation is interrupted by the group of people who caused the earlier commotion. The mage, along with the others, demands that Kang give them the cure too. The protagonist immediately recognizes them, and the guard states that they are citizens of Kamar. Since they mention the cure, the doctor uses his observer's eyes skill, but upon analyzing them, he realizes that none of them are injured. He then tells them that they are fine and don't need the cure, but they insist they were present during the fishmen's attack, and might have been infected as well. That's why they demand the cure, claiming that the city's people should be prioritized over the guards. The protagonist thinks that if those people hadn't destroyed the bridge from the beginning, at least the south gate would have been secure, and he finds this utterly disgraceful. Then, he says that he should indeed give them the cure if they truly need it. The woman asserts that this is exactly what he must do. They become desperate to know who will be cured first, and the doctor says they shouldn't worry because there is enough for everyone. After that, he states that it's 400,000 in gold per person, thinking he'll be as shameless as they are. Consequently, they get angry about the high price for the cure. Because they complained about the price, Kang raises it to 500,000 in gold. They complain again, and the protagonist increases the price to 600,000. Since they kept complaining, he changes the price again, raising it to 700,000 in gold. Angrily, they ask if the protagonist isn't charging too much for the cure. One of the city's residents even asks why the protagonist is trying to profit in the midst of a crisis in Kamar. He, however, asks everyone to calm down. He explains that he plans to distribute the cure for free to patients who show real symptoms of the disease. Immediately, they claim they are sick and, in desperation, fear they will turn into fishmen at any moment. But Kang knows they aren't infected and won't turn into fishmen, so he can't distribute the cure to them for free. However, he suddenly has an idea. From his pocket, he pulls out a vial of fishman blood. He says he'll give the cure to the first person who drinks that liquid, because whoever does this will be infected, becoming a patient, and thus entitled to the cure for free. But they are afraid to drink it because they know that's how they'll actually become what they fear. With a smile on his face, the doctor asks who will be the first to drink from the vial. They ask what happens if the cure doesn't work after they drink the monster's blood. They also ask why the protagonist doesn't give the cure before they drink it. But soon they give up and leave. Khan remarks that just moments ago, they insisted they were unwell. However, they change their tune, saying they feel perfectly fine and don't need anything anymore. The guard is impressed by how the doctor managed to scare off those stubborn fools, saying he is truly amazing. Kang responds that dealing with bad clients is his specialty. Besides that, the important thing is that he planned to leave the city today, but he laments that no cart can leave the city. The guard leader confirms this is indeed the situation. Then Kim asks his friend what they will do. The protagonist replies that they will have to spend the night in the city. Kim comments that he wants dinner first. Kang says they'll eat after dealing with the artifact. Kim recalls that he mentioned fighting a rare monster and praises his work. His friend notes it was easier than the zombie monster. Afterward, they head to the city's artifact appraisal shop. The vendor, overly enthusiastic, greets them and asks what kind of business they want to conduct. However, Khan notices the vendor's nervousness, suspecting at first glance that he's a scammer. Even so, he asks the man to appraise an item. Soon, the vendor gets excited upon seeing it's a rare artifact, and he thinks he must find a way to scam this item at all costs. But the protagonist easily sees through his intentions and stays alert. While the vendor is supposedly appraising the item, someone else enters the shop. Khan can only think about wanting to break the scammer's wrists before he says anything else stupid. But before he can act, the woman who entered the shop intervenes first. She lands a punch on the vendor, accusing him of trying to deceive people again. She puts him in a headlock and apologizes to the customer, explaining that this guy is a scammer who was trying to con him. She immediately takes over and promises to appraise the item properly. Then, she breaks the sphere, releasing the artifact inside, a type of ear accessory. She congratulates the protagonist on the amazing item, explaining that it can significantly boost his stats if he integrates it with the rest of his set. Kim asks his friend what an ear protector is. He replies that it's an accessory worn similarly to a piercing. The woman says that if he's interested in selling, she can offer a good price, but the protagonist says he plans to keep and use the item. He believes this item provides a specialty in maritime combat and can't afford to lose it. Then, he tosses one to Kim, saying that since it's a pair, he only needs one, and his friend can keep the other because if he ever gets into a water battle, he'll need something like this. Kim is deeply grateful for the gift. However, the protagonist can only think that he won't enter maritime combat again, as he now has someone to handle it for him. Then, Kim asks if he just needs to equip the item to see its stats. Khan confirms. Soon, his friend checks his system and notices the item's stats. Khan wastes no time and does the same. He says that in the future, if they achieve accomplishments like these together, they will share them equally. Kim agrees with this. The protagonist comments that it's already quite late, and they might end up sleeping on the streets at this rate. Kim asks if they can't just go to the mage's tower. Khan remembers the professor and Shuire saying it was a short time, but they were grateful. We part ways today, but the day we meet again will come. He concludes that going back on the same day after such a farewell would feel strange, so they might as well sleep on the streets. However, someone approaches them, telling them to wait. A while later, the woman from the shop heads home. When she arrives, she greets her family, but she's shocked to see the protagonist and his friends sitting at the table. She says they visited her shop earlier and asks her brother what he's doing there, and if he got fired from the guards. He replies that he's on medical leave. Khan remarks that he thought she looked like someone he knew and realizes she's Cyril's sister. Their mother tells her she should be thankful, because the doctor saved her brother, and he'll stay there for a bit until the gates open. The protagonist thinks that, at first glance, the Katela family seems like a normal family, but he's heard that they are the most historically significant guard family in Kamar. Cyril says he heard his savior was going to sleep on the street and found it nonsensical, so he invited them to spend the night at his house. His sister is delighted because she heard the rumors about the healer during the day. She introduces herself as Sile and says they can stay at her house for as long as they want, and that her brother can sleep anywhere. However, he asks who said he would sleep in the living room. Kim, seeing how they argue, concludes that they're definitely siblings. Night falls over the city, but the protagonist can't sleep. He gets up and wonders what time it might be. Looking out the window, he notices a fog has appeared, but it's concentrated in just one spot rather than spread everywhere. Now that he thinks about it, he recalls there's a watchtower at this house, so he decides to investigate. As he leaves the room, someone follows him. A man draws his sword and points it at the protagonist's neck. He wasn't expecting this, but finds himself facing a man he's never seen before, who asks his name. The man, holding the sword, asks who the protagonist is. Kong is irritated by the sword. He prepares to use his crossbow, until Cyril appears and calls out to his uncle, explaining that the protagonist is a healer. The man asks Kong if he's the one who healed his nephew. Kong lowers the crossbow and responds affirmatively. He introduces himself as Hekaro Taylor, a retired guard, and quickly apologizes for nearly harming his benefactor. Kong says there's no need to worry because having a stranger in his house would indeed provoke such a reaction. Hekaro mentions that he usually starts his day monitoring the lake a bit. Others say it's pointless since there's a magical barrier, but he just wants to protect his hometown by himself. Kong comments that this must be why there's a watchtower there. Now, he can see things more clearly. After summoning his crossbow, he tells Hekaro that he doesn't think it was useless. With the harpoon shot ability active, the protagonist fires a shot, causing an explosion of light in the sky, which triggers a reaction in the fog lingering in the area. The protagonist confirms his suspicions. Even the others are surprised when they see what was hidden. because with just a decoy, the protagonist realizes that invaders were attempting to sneak into Kamar under the cover of the fog. They immediately go on high alert, as the city is under attack. Hekaro tells the others to grab their weapons and fight, as the monsters are trying to breach the city. He then prepares himself as well, and fights against the invaders, joined by his nephews. Seeing everyone fighting, Kim comments that the whole family has risen to help. Khan says this was expected from a family of guards. Earlier, they had received some weapons as gifts. Eager to test them, the protagonist says he can't just stand by watching others fight. As some monsters roar ferociously, Kim charges in to fight them, saying that they should have stayed in the water. After attacking, he remarks that this weapon is spectacular. However, the others warn him not to let his guard down because more are coming. The protagonist thinks that normally these monsters don't stay out of the water and wonders if they're under the effect of some kind of land-breathing spell. Soon, he notices a magical portal above the water, and imagines it must be because of this mermaid rotation. Regardless, he has a weapon that gains an enhancement effect when used under moonlight, and with this enhancement applied, he attacks from a distance, waiting 10 seconds before he can use it again. Khan thinks that by getting rid of the mermaids, the other monsters will also leave. Hekaro says that the enemies are weakened, and tells the others to take advantage and attack. However, the mermaids, which have magical properties, are summoning another portal again, and through it bring new enemies to the battle, one of them being a giant crab. But Kim can only think about how much meat there is in that crab. Even Kong comments that he's heard monster meat is really good. Sile questions if this is really important right now. She mentions that the creature is getting close and heading for the buildings, so it needs to be stopped as soon as possible. Kim then charges toward the monster. With his sharp eyes, Khan notices that the crab has strong protection from its exoskeleton. Immediately, he alerts Kim and says they need to find the enemy's weakness. Cyril is down and unable to move, but he notices his sister fighting the monster, and tells her to get out of there immediately. She, however, refuses to let the enemy invade the city and, in the midst of the fight, ends up being thrown far away, and left vulnerable to an attack. Realizing this could be her end, she becomes frightened, but Kim charges toward her. The protagonist also launches an attack, and together they prevent the girl from being hit. In the process, Khan discovers the enemy's weak point. He quickly tells everyone to aim for the crab's legs. The leader then shouts that he won't let the monster get past them, as they are the guards of Kamar. Sometime later, the sun rises, and the heroes emerge victorious from the battle. Hekaro thanks Kim and the doctor for helping protect his city and family, stating that he will find a way to reward them. Kong, however, says they only did what they had to do. He asks if the two are okay. Kim replies that they are, but they're just sleepy because they didn't sleep well, and their stamina is low. The leader then says they can rest now, and the others will take care of everything. He adds that he'll prepare a feast and serve crab meat. Sometime later, Kong wakes up. He sees Cyril and asks how long he slept. Cyril replies that he slept for an entire day. After sleeping for 25 hours straight following an exhausting battle, the first thing the protagonist asks about is the crab meat. Cyril says they were waiting for the two of them to wake up to start the feast because they couldn't celebrate without them. At the feast, they toast to Kamar. After eating the crab, they realize the meat melts immediately in their mouths. Besides tasting great, they now understand why nobles are crazy about it. Sile tells the two to enjoy it because they are the VIPs of this battle. Kim comments that his weapon did all the work. The girl agrees, saying it's not just a shovel. It's a weapon awarded annually to the most distinguished warriors of Kamar, making it a very rare item. Kim asks if it's okay for her to give such a precious item to them. She responds that it is, as her family has at least 11 of them. The protagonist looks at what remains of the crab, and wonders why it's glowing in a specific spot. With his keen eye, he notices an extraordinary fragment of the black and red shell. He quickly realizes that it contains an accessory item. His system alerts him that this is a rare keepsake, obtained by acquiring an item after defeating a powerful monster of Class A or higher. He knows he's earning an achievement, and no one would argue with him for accepting it, so he decides to keep it for now. After that, Hekaro approaches the protagonist and says he has good news. Khan notices he is accompanied. The leader of the guards greets him and says it's good to see him again. Kong asks what brings a guard here. He replies that it's an order from a superior, because, as a token of gratitude for his help, the Lord of Kamar has invited them. After leaving the feast, they head to the castle of the Lord of Kamar. Upon entering, one of the servants tells them to hurry, and asks if they are the ones responsible for saving Kamar. Hekaro says it's an honor to be called directly by the Lord of the city, while Kim asks how important this Lord is. Kong responds that, theoretically, he is the strongest genius mage of the Crimson Magic Tower. Despite such incredible talent and hard work, he isn't as arrogant as the other mages they've encountered. Kim asks if that's just theoretical. Shortly after, they meet the Lord. He begins crying, saying he heard that the monsters nearly destroyed the castle, and if not for them, he wouldn't know what to do. Hecuro tries to calm Gawain de Altagars, the Lord of Kamar. The protagonist remarks that Kim can now see the Lord is a crybaby and as scary as a cat. Gawain de Altagars says he has always thought that Kamar relied too heavily on the barriers of the magic towers. He also told his guards they needed to prepare in case something ever went wrong with the barrier, but they all opposed him, calling it a useless investment. Khan says the current security force is small and inadequate compared to the size of the city. The Lord states that he wishes to create Kamar's first family of knights. Hecuro asks the Lord to entrust the duty of reorganizing the knightly guard troop to the Katela family, saying it would be an honor. Kim comments that Hecuro's family will be completely elevated. He adds that thinking their family's long-standing wish is becoming a reality in his generation is amazing. The protagonist says that the position of knight is a great reward for saving Kamar. Thus, the adventurers who cooperated in the rescue should also be appropriately rewarded. The Lord says it's very humble of him because both are also the heroes who saved Kamar. He adds that all the items here are top quality and worth millions. Additionally, he promises qualifications to work for the Altagars family and continuous support. But the protagonist declines the offer. He explains that while he understands the Lord carefully prepared the items, Khan doesn't need them right now. Instead, he needs something rare, something he can't obtain on his own. The protagonist mentions that he and his friend are living in a place called Hind Village, a small village but one with undeniable influence. Due to the geographical nature of the area, travelers must pass through it, and because there are many monsters nearby, adventurers also visit frequently. As a result, the Adventurers Guild established a building early on, and the church members are also expanding their influence. The fact that only the Adventurers Guild and the church hold sway in such an important village doesn't feel right. The Lord tries to understand what the doctor is getting at. Khan requests that he build a branch of the Magic Association in Hind Village. The Magic Association is an exclusive facility for mages, where they can buy and sell magical items, receive related commissions, or rent lodging. The protagonist knows that having a magic association in Hind Village will make it harder for the Adventurers Guild and the church to boast as they do now. The Lord realizes that by doing Kong this favor, he might gain the cooperation of the Crimson Magic Tower, and by aligning with the Magic Tower, they'll need to obtain construction permission, though the budget is concerning. Nevertheless, the Lord says that since this is Kang's wish, he'll proceed with whatever is needed. Kim is delighted that he'll get the desired reward. In turn, Kang says he'd be grateful if the Lord could support their travel expenses and supplies for returning to the village, such as food, expenses, potions, a boat, and a guide to cross the lake, as the lake is a monster's den. Kang also asks the Lord to cast an enchantment on the boat so it can withstand the monsters and a magical anti-nausea spell for his companion, who suffers from severe seasickness. However, the Lord interrupts the protagonist, asking if the reward shouldn't end with the Magic Association. Kang replies that what he requested is for himself, but the Magic Association reward is for his companion. Kim adds that, unlike Dr. Kang, he's not a mage, so he says that acquiring the Magic Association has nothing to do with him. Upon hearing this, the Lord faints in front of them. Sometime later, the two head to the boat area. Kang encounters a family and asks if they'll be his guides. The father of the family says it will be a great honor to fulfill this task. Then, they depart on the boat, and the Katela's siblings bid them farewell, with the girl asking them to keep her updated about their future adventures. As they move away, the protagonist comments that this is a scene that fits the Crimson Magic Tower so well. At least, that's what he thought before, because a while later, he and the others fell into the water, about to be devoured by a sea monster. An hour before this happened, Kang was looking at the map of the route they needed to take to reach their destination. He tells Kim that they must pass through the Red Forest to get to the village, explaining that the place is famous for outsiders getting lost there. The protagonist asks if the three of them are from Tragedy. Barlik responds that they are, saying he only went to Kamar because his daughter Rudy was sick and he sought treatment for her. While Daisy, his wife, holds their daughter, he explains that they couldn't return earlier because boat trips were cancelled. Kang comments that the Lord found a guide at just the right time. Kim agrees, also mentioning that the anti-nausea spell is active, and he doesn't feel sick at all. Kang remarks that they can rest until they reach their destination. The protagonist takes the opportunity to check his system, and notices that the member list improves his stats according to the number of organizations he is part of. The system states he earned an achievement through the Crimson Tower, and he notes this is the second time this has happened. Kang and Kim were accepted as Catalyst Knights. They aren't part of the family, but they fought together and somehow earned the knightly title. However, he thinks that using everything at his disposal is rule number 6 in the survival guide. Not only that, but he sees that a new mission is available, to collect 10,000 points, with a new skill as the reward. The protagonist thinks the system is demanding more and more from him, but he doesn't care if it's a black star or not, he just wants to give up. Soon after, Barlik announces that the Red Forest is just ahead. Kang comments that the forest is as red as its name suggests. Kim, however, finds it scary, also mentioning that, at least here, there are no monsters. His friend, however, tells him he shouldn't have said that. Kim asks why. The doctor says it brings bad luck. Immediately, aquatic monsters begin attacking their boat. The first to be struck is Barlik. Kang doesn't stay idle. He stands up and attacks the creatures. Afterward, he helps the boatman, telling him not to worry about the monsters and just keep rowing. Then, his wife becomes worried, seeing that more creatures are approaching. A larger monster indeed charges toward the boat, but the protagonist quickly uses his crossbow and fires at the beast. His friend comments that the enemy is trying to flee. However, the protagonist knows that isn't the case. Soon, their boat starts to move. Not only that, but the monster rises from below and capsizes the boat. Everyone is in danger. Upside down, Kim screams in fear, realizing he is about to be swallowed by the giant fish. Meanwhile, Kang says that the fish really thought this through. Nevertheless, he doesn't stop attacking, as he creates an ice arrow using a potion. With it, Kang shoots the enemy, and manages to freeze the monster along with part of the water. After that, he asks Kim to attack the ice floor, which he does with an electric strike. Afterward, the family reunites and asks if their daughter is okay. She replies that she is, just feeling a bit cold. Barlik wonders how the travelers don't get tired. Looking at the monster, Kang comments that something is bothering him. His friend asks what it is. He explains that camafan fish usually stay deep underwater to avoid sunlight. They never appear near the surface. Kim remarks that it probably doesn't like the light. But the doctor points out that this creature appeared even when the sun was still high and, with his sharp eyes, examines the details, and realizes the creature has been dead for about 3 days. He then cuts open the monster, and strange things begin to emerge from inside. Even Kim doesn't know what it is and asks his friend. Kang responds that it's a parasitic plant for monsters. This parasite had been controlling the camafan fish the entire time. He also notices that the monster mutated due to excessive mana exposure, and that its function ceased when the host died. The protagonist is a bit puzzled by this last piece of information, but shortly after, they are startled as something emerges from the water, and comments that he was already expecting something like this to happen, as there's always a final boss. He was about to tell his friend to prepare for battle, but when he looks at Kim, he realizes that he's extremely seasick. The monster, however, is fully ready to attack, and targets the defenseless family. With its tentacles, it captures all 3 of them. However, the protagonist doesn't let it go unanswered and fires his crossbow. This time, he equips a harpoon arrow. He manages to free the couple from the tentacles, but notices that Rude is still trapped. Kim sees the girl being taken by the enemy, and for a brief moment, remembers his daughter, something that reminds him of his world of origin. This awakens a paternal instinct in him, which stops him from just standing there watching. So, he jumps in and manages to save the little girl, but falls into the water with her right after. Seeing this makes both his friend and the girl's parents worried. Seeing their daughter fall into the water deeply worries her parents, especially her mother, who panics and is comforted by her husband. Noticing their anxiety, the doctor uses one of his abilities to calm her down, and assures her he will bring her daughter back safely. The protagonist hadn't expected Kim to sink with her, and thinks that if he leaves him alone for much longer, he might die trying to save her. Underwater, Kim fights the monster, but upon cutting one of its tentacles, he realizes the creature can regenerate. He knows that if he were alone, he could easily escape, but he doesn't know how to do so with a child in tow, and he's starting to run out of air. However, when he looks up, he sees a light. From it come wind arrows fired by the protagonist, which give him and the girl a bit more breathing room. Meanwhile, Kang moves toward them. He seizes the opportunity to cut the tentacle holding them, freeing Kim to escape with the girl. Seeing his friend like this makes him wonder how Dr. Kang is so consistent. Then, the protagonist takes the opportunity to slice through the creature's tentacles, and when he is in a triumphant position, Kim warns him to be careful, as he knows the monster can regenerate its tentacles. But he soon notices that the doctor anticipated this and froze the tentacles he had cut to prevent it from happening. The protagonist says he's not using just any knife but one with freezing properties he just crafted by carving an ice stone. By doing so, Kang's system alerts him that he has completed another activity and unlocked a new objective. After that, Kang tells his friend not to worry about him and to escape with the girl. Kim complies, telling him to be careful. Meanwhile, the protagonist considers how the random enchantment gives 2 random properties to an item, and he uses this against the enemy. But while he freezes one tentacle, another grabs a rock and hurls it at the protagonist stealthily. However, as always, he is prepared, and with his crossbow he shoots, this time using a frost arrow. The rock freezes upon impact. The protagonist explains that the second enchantment increases attack power against frozen enemies by 400%. However, when he hits the rock, he ends up turning his back to the enemy, which fully emerges from the depths, revealing itself to be a sequoia squid. Kong thinks that he has finally encountered the creature's head. The squid, however, is far from pleased to face the protagonist. It then unleashes a sonic attack. The doctor is irritated by the sound, but the worst was yet to come, because the sound was a summoning call for smaller squids. Kong realizes they are all infected, and the boss is using the smaller squids as a shield. But he believes this will be easy to overcome. With his crossbow and frost arrows he fires. Some shots don't hit the enemy directly, but this is intentional, as this time, he fired arrows laced with holy water. He knows that the host usually can't think clearly because of the parasite, but still follows its instincts, as the sequoia squid's characteristic is its attraction to light. So Kong takes advantage of this information, and uses the squid's distraction to attack in close combat. When he gets close enough to the monster, he delivers a clean strike with his ice blade. Through this, the parasite inside the squid is expelled and finally dies. Afterward, the protagonist's system alerts him that he has acquired some items, but he's overwhelmed with information, as he earned points for killing the monsters, and all the parasites are fleeing since their hosts are dead. He wonders if they are all considered dead after being rid of the parasites. It seems so, as his system alerts him that he has successfully completed the mission and rewards him. Soon, the protagonist concludes it was worth it. After resurfacing, he asks Kim how the family is doing. Kim, feeling nauseous, can only say he's glad his friend is okay. Soon, the protagonist realizes he was useless during this mission due to his discomfort. Upon returning to the shore, he meets with the family and notices that not everyone is okay, as the girl needs help, and the parents beg the doctor to do something. But he becomes concerned upon seeing the girl's condition, and thinks he might have arrived too late. Worried, the parents ask if the girl will be alright. Now in the Red Forest, Kong says Rudy is suffering from hypothermia. He explains that he first needs to warm her up, then prepares to light a fire and asks them to keep their daughter warm with a blanket. Kim, however, draws the doctor's attention to the sky, pointing out that it's about to rain. Kong asks how far the city is from their location. Barlik replies that the nearest route is about 2 hours away. The protagonist then says they can't make it in time, and need to avoid the rain in the forest for now. Soon they walk among the trees. As they venture into the forest, the protagonist observes that everything around them is indeed red. Grass, trees, even the dirt. Barlik mentions that the animals are red too. Not only that, but the people living around the forest are also affected. Everyone born in Tragedy has red hair. Daisy tells them not to lose sight of them, as foreigners always get lost in the forest. Kim asks if it's because the path is difficult. She responds that they tried placing signs and creating direct trails to the village, but none of them worked. The mages said it's due to the strange power of the Red Forest. During their walk, the protagonist tells everyone to stop moving. Daisy doesn't understand why. Holding his knife, Khan demands that whoever is hiding show themselves immediately. From the bushes emerges a man, realizing his presence has been noticed. Calmly, he steps out of his hiding place. But he isn't alone. A woman accompanies him. Barlik says they are from the Red Road gang. They are known for robbing travelers, stealing items and valuable belongings. All gang members have red hair and only target those unlike them, foreigners. However, they do accept people with dyed hair into the gang. After the explanation, one of the bandits says he knows one of them is a healer, and doesn't care about the rest. He's only after the healer. Hearing this, Khan deduces that they want to kidnap the healer because one of their members is injured, but the bandit simply tells him to follow orders. In his thoughts, Khan knows he has little time, and cannot help them because he urgently needs to find a safe place to stay. But soon, he has an idea, and tells the road bandit that if one of them is sick or injured, he agrees to help, provided they offer shelter for a night. Angrily, the bandit asks what he's talking about. The protagonist points to the sky, saying it's about to rain. The bandit asks if they look like innkeepers. However, Khan says that if they agree to help, he won't report them to the Adventurers Guild. The two bandits are not happy to hear this and charge at the doctor, telling him to flee if he can. However, Khan has no intention of running. On the contrary, he dodges the woman's attacks and prepares to counter. With the handle of his knife, he strikes her. Seeing this enrages her companion, who tries to hit the protagonist. But Kong is faster, and after dodging the attack, he lands a kick that sends him flying. The bandit remarks how fast the protagonist is, while the woman says he must be using an ability. She decides to do the same. The bandit pulls out a magical scroll, and after activating it, declares that the protagonist is now lost. Magical chains bind Kong, and he realizes they are corrupted mana restraints. After this, the bandit charges forward, saying the protagonist is nothing without his abilities. What he didn't expect, however, was for Kong to have enough strength to break the chains, and the fact that he underestimated the protagonist led him to overlook the truth that Kong isn't a mana user. After freeing himself, the doctor lands a solid punch on the road bandit's face. Seeing her companion fall, the woman panics. Kong turns to her, facing his next target with a smile on his face. After some time, Kong gives both of them a thorough beating. With that, they apologize and say they will safely take him to their hideout. The protagonist remarks that it's exactly what he thought. Then, they all head to the location, and the bandit reveals that their hideout is behind a stone. Using magic, he opens the passage. The stone moves, revealing a cave ahead. After that, they enter the location. However, upon arrival, the protagonist is met with several injured people. Even Kim is shocked by this, and the protagonist realizes why they needed a healer. The bandit explains that everyone was fine but suddenly started feeling pain. He thought a healer would be able to take care of all of them. However, someone in the back asks who they are. The girl speaks to Lady Rosent, and the protagonist concludes that she must be the leader of the highway bandits. Our video ends here. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, bye bye.